It all started when an incident occurred about an hour ago near the university. The young girl was very surprised when the guy suddenly proposed to her. At first, she didn't understand what he meant, but the guy's friends began to make fun of her. The young man knew that the girl was a little confused, but he invited her to look around. Only now the young girl noticed that she was standing in the middle of a heart strewn with 1,000 roses. This realization suddenly made her feel very awkward, but the guy didn't pay attention to her. Instead, he opened the box and showed the magic crystal that he stubbornly tried to get out of the dungeon. The young man deliberately stayed late to propose and give it to the girl. However, she was more surprised by the fact that her interlocutor was in a dungeon, which is not for mere mortals. The man laughed and said that no one else in the entire university could get into the dungeon. However, their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a hooded stranger who ordered the girl to leave. He bent down and began to straighten the flowers, because the angle of the bend was crooked, and the flower should have been located in the other direction. The groom himself was so carried away by the story of his strength and abilities that he completely did not notice the changes taking place around him. Our main character at this time straightened the flowers and was about to move on with his business. However, it was suddenly established when the young man handed him a ring and asked him to accept his love. The hero was extremely surprised by this state of affairs and even froze for a while. The groom's friends are men because their friend did such a strange thing. Only after a minute of silence did the young man notice that he had accidentally proposed to a complete stranger. After this, he immediately became angry and threw the ring on the ground in front of him. The guy began to look around and look for his beloved. However, only now did he realize that the girl had disappeared, taking advantage of this situation. Then the groom started shouting at his friends for letting the girl go. Our hero was only worried that the flowers that he had straightened were again ruined. I noticed that if everything is so neglected, then recognition cannot be successful in any case. After that, the hero leaned down and wanted to straighten the flowers, which greatly angered the groom. The guy was beyond his strength, so he didn't hesitate long and immediately hit the stranger in the face. Our hero was surprised by this because he did not expect an attack from the outside at all. It was a strong enough blow that made the guy fly back and fall to the ground. The groom was angry that his proposal failed because of a stranger. That's why he started beating the guy who just wanted to help and straighten the flowers. The beating lasted for some time. The groom was supported by his friends. Still, the guys decided to stop so as not to accidentally kill the guy. After that, they just laughed at such a weakling and went about their business. Our hero thought he was going to die. He was cold. He couldn't even move his fingers. However, suddenly something happened and the guy suddenly stopped feeling pain. Suddenly, everything around seemed to become dark, and a bright light appeared right before the hero's eyes. At first, he thought that these were some kind of hallucinations, but everything was very similar to the information window from the game. And at this time, that same failed bride with her bodyguards ran back to the scene of the incident. During her escape, the girl saw that the stranger was being attacked, so she wanted to help him. However, now they came running and saw no one around, only flowers lay on the ground. The bodyguards even doubted the girl's words, but the flowers said otherwise. Defense attorney suggested that the boys left the candle flowers and left. There were no bloodstains on the ground. This was very suspicious, but another bodyguard noticed that it was time for the girl to return home. She agreed with them, but asked the guys to check the information about this incident tomorrow. After this, the bride went home without knowing that something had actually happened. And by this time, our hero had returned to his home and was sitting on the bed. For a long time, he had seen a window of information in front of him and could not get rid of it. Even if he was hiding under the bed, it appeared right from under the sheets. You can close pop-up windows in your browser, but this didn't work that way. Even if the guy closed his eyes, he still saw this window right in front of him. There were a huge number of pop-ups notifying you that there were unread messages. After the young man looked at his status and looked at his skills, he was able to close all pop-up windows. Only after that did he get tired of rushing to cover himself and sigh with relief. The hero was incredibly glad that all the messages had disappeared, because his head was already starting to hurt. However, the guy did not understand what happened to him because they beat him for real. And after this window appeared, he completely recovered all his injuries. Just as he thought about it, another new window appeared right in front of his face. The hero immediately jumped up on the bed and was very disappointed by his return. He was infuriated by the appearance of 3 new notifications, but still he decided to look at them one by one. Only after watching could the guy close all the pop-up windows and move on with his life in peace. Just as he was rejoicing at freedom, the notification window appeared in front of him again. The hero thought that this was an imagination that would go away immediately after he slept properly. That is why the young man turned back to bed, covered himself with a blanket, and went to sleep. It was around midnight when the hero tried to sleep, and there was a notification in front of his face. After 2 hours, the picture had not changed at all, except that the young man still could not sleep. I got up in bed and was horrified that I couldn't close this notification and relax. It infuriated him that it didn't disappear, so the guy decided to take a look. Sleepy, with huge dark circles under his eyes, he opened the message. It said that the guy had one task available to him for a beginner. To complete the task, it was necessary to achieve 10% mastery in performing one specific movement. Since childhood, the hero hated such reminders of uncompleted tasks, and unread messages irritated him. However, he had no choice. The guy decided that if he completed the task, then everything would be fine. The guy didn't understand why the application was torturing him so much, because it was just a basic technique. However, the strange thing was that he began to feel that power was filling his fists. The strength, angle, and correct posture of the strike instantly formed in his mind. The guy began to repeat the movement over and over again just to complete the task. At 2 a.m., he began training and performed the movements through pain, sweat, and fatigue. This went on all night. Only in the morning the guy was able to breathe calmly and sit down to rest. He immediately looked through his window to check how he had completed the task. Tony hated leaving things unfinished, so he decided to see it through to completion and worked until school started. Upon arrival, his friend immediately attacked him, who noticed that the guy received a bad grade. They were fighting again because the hero was selective about his grades. Tony was already getting good grades in math, but he wanted to get the maximum score because the rest didn't suit him. Then a classmate invited the guy to come to her and study English together. However, he refused and said that he could not study other subjects until he got a perfect score in the previous one. The friend was not happy with this answer, but she did not expect anything else. That same evening, the order was delivered to our hero's home right to his door. It turned out to be a large punching bag that the guy installed himself. Immediately after installing the new equipment, the young man decided to try it out. He put on special gloves and began to further train basic techniques. This went on for several days in a row until Tony ruined all his ordered bags. During this time, even his special gloves were completely worn out and abrasions appeared on the guy's hands. However, he was happy and smiled, hoping that he had achieved 100% completion of the task. However, I was shocked when I saw that I was only able to complete the task when I reached 300% and moved on to the next level. Just at this time, his girlfriend, who was worried about him, knocked on his apartment. Tony didn't show up at school for several days, so she decided to visit him at home. As soon as he opened the doors, the girl immediately saw that he looked like the life had been sucked out of him. At the same moment, Tony collapsed onto the girl's shoulder due to fatigue. The friend was a little embarrassed by the guy's unexpected behavior, but she understood him. First of all, she decided to feed her friend and give him a good rest. They sat together in the establishment and waited until the hero could eat. Due to his illness, the young man was forced to arrange all his things in perfect order before using them. Immediately after this, he began to eat food one after another very quickly. The girl looked at him and was glad that she had such a good friend. Tony ate all the food and sat back on the couch, rubbing his stomach. Immediately after this, he reminded that he did not like to remain in debt and asked how he could repay for the food. The girl couldn't answer right away, so she asked for a little time to think. I looked to the side, killing slot machines, and asked for one toy as a token of gratitude. Tony agreed to this, so the young people got up, paid, and went to the slot machines. The young man was extremely focused and radiated a very powerful aura. He accumulated energy for some time, and then suddenly opened his eyes and rushed to attack. Tony handled the slot machine like a pro, grabbing the toys with ease. The schoolgirl was amazed at how professionally the guy played. However, she was annoyed when the first toy suddenly fell and did not reach the exit. However, Lucy stopped and said that this was her friend's special plan. After 5 minutes, the girl herself was convinced that the guy was purposefully stacking the toys with each other at the very edge. The schoolgirl didn't understand what was the point of putting toys in a row if they couldn't even be pulled out. However, he did not listen to her completely and asked his friend which of these rabbits she wanted to get. However, the girl was already going to impress the schoolgirl, so she told him to pull out absolutely all the rabbits for her. After this, the hero took on the most important task. He deftly controlled the toy, and the schoolgirl stood nearby and prompted him. With one movement, our hero sent the toy into a circular rotation. Then he took aim, released his claws, and with the last toy knocked down all the previous hairs. All of them fell together into a cell, from where they could be taken out and taken for yourself. Lucy and Tony were very happy about their victory. The schoolgirl was very impressed with her skills. A friend said that she was getting one rabbit for herself and that she could give all the rest to the girl. The schoolgirl was very grateful for such a wonderful gift and gladly accepted it. After that, the friends said goodbye to the girl and went to their home. Lucy gently held the rabbit to her chest and enjoyed the atmosphere. She hesitantly asked Tony if it was true that he had recently been beaten by a bully. However, the guy replied that she shouldn't think about it. Nothing bad had happened. He accompanied the girl to her house and said that he would not go upstairs with her. He also reassured his friend and promised that he would definitely come to school tomorrow. After that, the guy said goodbye to Lucy and left her alone with the rabbit. The whole night passed and a new day arrived when Tony promised to return to school. At the entrance, near the fence, that same hooligan stood with his friends and laughed. Subordinates heard that the guy they beat did not die, but did not go to school for several days. A young girl appeared in front of them, ordering the hooligans to never touch that guy. At first, the bandits didn't even understand how to react to the fact that some schoolgirl was threatening them. However, they then laughed loudly because the girl thought she was someone important. The main bully came forward and said that whoever threatened him would have consequences. He leaned over the girl and said that he would forgive her this time only because she was very sweet. However, he then tried to grab her and said that the schoolgirl should come and play with them. At that time, Tony returned to school as if nothing had happened and walked along the corridor. Classmates looked at the guy and discussed rumors that he had recently been beaten. However, Tony did not pay attention to these conversations and first of all went to the restroom. There he calmly washed his face and looked at his reflection in the mirror to put himself in order. A skill window was reflected before his eyes, indicating that his skills had been enhanced in connection with the assignment. Suddenly, the hooligans who beat the guy a few days ago entered that same toilet. They recognized the schoolboy who disturbed them a few days ago. The hooligans did not expect to meet a guy in such a place, so they believed that the world was really small. In the hands of one bully, Tony saw a rabbit which he had recently won for Lucy. He immediately guessed that this rabbit had clearly not come from a machine gun. The bully admitted that he recently met with his friend, who dared to threaten him. Tony got angry because it really was a Lucy doll. Before he had time to come to his senses, the bully was already planning to start another fight with him. The guy pressed his left fist to his chin and his right one sharply forward. However, this time, Tony easily managed to dodge at the last moment and avoided the blow. After countless trainings, these strikes seemed very mediocre and weak to him. The hero took a couple of steps back and took a fighting stance to defend himself. The bully was amazed that the guy still wanted to fight him. Therefore, he ordered all his subordinates to attack at the same time in order to quickly finish him off. The guys obeyed their commander and rushed to attack the hero from all sides. However, Tony has not been training in vain for the last few days. They are a threat to him. He pulled his left fist back and then turned his body and sharply extended it forward. The guy struck the bully with such force that he instantly lost several teeth. Immediately after that, he flew back several meters and fell to the ground. Before his subordinates had time to come to their senses, the schoolboy moved on to beat the bully further. He delivered blow after blow, completely unable to control his strength. Tony beat all the bullies until they lost consciousness and only stopped after that. Only at this moment, the leader said that the guy had misunderstood everything. However, he did not have time to finish and lost consciousness after his subordinates. It was revealed what really happened yesterday afternoon when Lucy came to the bullies. The girl was far from weak, so she was not afraid at all and attacked first. It was at the moment of the fight that her beloved rabbit broke away and got lost somewhere in the yard. Therefore, now the girl was sitting in class and reproaching herself for having managed to lose Tony's gift. She explained to her classmate that she had lost her very important doll on the way. At that moment, the head girl entered the class and said that some guy was looking for Lucy. The girl raised her head and saw that her friend Tony was standing next to her. She was very happy to see him, so she immediately perked up. The girl jumped up and ran to meet Tony, which greatly surprised her classmates. The guy said he heard that she was looking for trouble with some bullies last night. The guy extended his hand forward and gave the girl her pink rabbit. Lucy was very happy about the return of her missing item and thanked the guy. However, he immediately asked her to be more careful because he would not be able to return him so quickly next time. However, Lucy was not worried because she understood perfectly well that she could ask her friend for another new one. Immediately after this, Tony said goodbye to the girl and headed out of the educational institution. At this time, he learned that he had moved to a new level and the next stage of the task was about to appear. However, the guy was upset that before starting a new level of the task, it was necessary to complete the intermediate training. Especially for this, he decided to go to the sports center of their city. In the boxing gym, the guy decided to train combined punches, which were much more difficult than regular exercises. His left uppercut was already 300% worked out, so it was necessary to move on. He decided to practice his right uppercut first, then move on to combination punches. His energy returned. The guy was more worried that his obsessive-compulsive disorder had worsened. The girls in the gym were discussing the newcomer, who had been training for the third day in a row. In addition to them, the athletes who practiced boxing here also drew attention to him. One of them was particularly interested in the newcomer who had attracted so much attention. He watched closely as Tony practiced his punches over and over again. Suddenly, the guy decided to interfere with his training and came close to the bag. The hero was very surprised by the appearance of a stranger who interrupted his training. This boxer told the hero that he was doing the exercises incorrectly. This was the city's first champion in hard boxing who wanted to teach the guy real boxing. However, Tony needed to continue to increase his mastery of the blow, so he asked the champion not to interfere with him. The athlete was furious at being rejected and told to leave. Vanessa was at her home playing a musical keyboard instrument. Her fingers fluttered over the keys, and their translation produced a beautiful melody. Suddenly, her training was interrupted by an employee who entered the office and addressed his mistress. The man apologized for the intrusion and noted that he had found the man the girl was talking about. This immediately changed everything, so Vanessa looked up from what she was doing and decided to follow him. And at this time, the boxing champion, irritated by the newcomer's refusal, challenged him to a fight. Tony was surprised that this athlete was going to fight him. However, the man said that he was not going to fight with the guy, but to teach him real boxing. All the people present around them were surprised at this turn of events. At this time, Vanessa Fan entered the boxing gym, surprising everyone present. The champion saw the main star of his school, so he wanted to show off in front of her. Without any unnecessary warning, he suddenly stood up in a fighting stance and swung his fist. Tony barely managed to block before the enemy's blow fell on him. The champion was very surprised that the guy managed to block his blow. Tony noticed that during a real fight, his progress increased faster, so he began to egg the champion on. The athlete was a little embarrassed that the guy was not afraid of him and openly went into battle. The spectators were also not happy that the champion would have to compete with a newcomer. Vanessa also noticed that Tony was able to easily withstand the wrestler's blow. The fight became more and more interesting when new spectators appeared in the hall. Vanessa, Tony, and the gym champion turned their attention to who had just entered. It turned out to be the great fighter brother Bean, nicknamed the Tiger. The man was inspired by the fight between the two guys, so he wanted to join them. In fact, this brother ended up in the hall not by chance. It all happened because of one evening. The guy was in his club when the same hooligan turned to him for help. He offered him a ring as payment for Bean to deal with one guy. The fighter was impressed that, in gratitude for his help, he was offered a ring with a magic crystal, which was difficult to obtain. The bully admitted that he bought it for $200,000 on the underground black market specifically to show his respect. His honesty greatly amused Bean, so he decided not to hold back his emotions. The guy grabbed the bully tightly by the neck and promised to deal with his request. Therefore, the audience knew very well that the enemy of the bandit Bean was practically doomed to defeat. The champion wanted to protect his hall and everyone present, so he came forward to him. However, the bandit did not want to listen to this guy, so he ordered him to fly out of the way. Instead, he asked those present who Tony was and where to find him. Only now it dawned on everyone that the bandit came to the hall for a reason, but for a certain person. Those present were very surprised that it turned out to be that same newcomer. Bean immediately realized that everyone paid attention to this thin guy for a reason and turned to him. Tony showed no fear and asked why Bean was looking for him. The guy admitted that he didn't want to create problems, but in gratitude for some help, he was promised a ring with a magic crystal from the dungeon. Vanessa and Tony immediately recognized the same ring with which the bully proposed to the girl. Meanwhile, the bandit ordered his assistants to surround Tony and prevent him from escaping. The guys with the bats immediately obeyed the order and stood on both sides of the hero. The champion tried to defend the guy and said that on school grounds he was responsible for the safety of everyone present. However, the bandit did not even let him finish his sentence and immediately hit him. This was completely against the rules and very cruel, so the audience screamed in horror. The champion fell to the floor, and the bandit was about to finish him off with his fists. However, at the last moment, Tony stopped his fist with one hand and told him that he should only attack him. Bean wasn't going to fight by all the rules, so he reached into his pants for his hidden weapon. He pulled out an iron pipe and tried to hit the hero with it. However, the guy successfully dodged the blows and retreated back. The bandit was terribly annoyed by this, so he decided to call on his strength to help and tore his shirt with his muscles. The guy could use magical techniques, so now he concentrated all his power in the pipe. Suddenly, from a small stub, it turned into a real long, sharp spear. Everyone present was very surprised that the piece of pipe suddenly grew larger and did not understand what was happening. In fact, Bandit was called the Sixth Weapon King and for his abilities. Vanessa's assistant noticed that this guy was gifted, but he had not fully awakened his ability. Several decades ago, the world suddenly changed and various monsters began to appear. Some people began to discover superpowers in themselves in order to overcome them. It was precisely these people who were called gifted, thanks to their suddenly discovered powers. Superpower can only be awakened once and is divided into levels from weakest to strongest. In addition, those gifted who have reached the highest rank are capable of becoming the supreme ruler of all mankind, superior to all ruling classes. One wandering sorcerer told Bean that as long as he became stronger, he could go beyond the capabilities of the gifted. Therefore, the power of awakening gave him a strong physique and the ability to strengthen weapons. That is why the guy was so confident in his abilities and attacked the newcomer without hesitation. He used his inner energy, which allowed him to use skills. The champion watched the opponents fight and was impressed that the newcomer was able to cope with what even he could not withstand. However, he wanted to help the guy and shouted to him that the bandit was attacking with the intent to kill. Tony had been quite successful at dodging all the blows so far. However, the guy was not going to just stand still and dodge forever. He waited for the right moment and decided to counterattack his opponent. The first thing Tony did was strike at Bean's weapon itself, knocking it out of his hands. Immediately after this, the guy swung a second time to attack the enemy himself. The champion was surprised to see that the newcomer had completely adopted his fighting style. Everything happened very quickly, so in a few moments the hero managed to hit the bandit in the chest several times. With the last blow, he was able to break the bandit's spear and at the same time completed his intermediate combination training. However, this was not enough for the guy, so he continued to strike his opponent, raising his level of perception of physical fitness higher and higher. Tony masterfully practiced punches with both hands, reproducing everything he had learned during training. The last blow was especially strong, knocking out his opponent. Tony stopped only after completing the intermediate combination workout at 300%. The amazing strength of the young guy made the bandit think that he was one of the awakened ones. He even thought that this newcomer belonged to the Fan family fighters. However, Tony replied that he had no idea what Bean and his company were even talking about. Bean admitted that he lost his fight, so he was going to leave the boxing gym. His assistants helped him and led him by the arms because the guy was unable to move independently. And Tony, as if nothing had happened, adjusted his punching bag and was going to train further. Vanessa was impressed by this fight, thinking that the guy was hiding his true strength. The girl went back to her place but ordered the employee to watch this guy. After that, everything was in order and the spectators went to their places to continue studying. At this time, the bandit was impressed that he had met a real gifted person. The guys were heading to their club when suddenly a stranger appeared behind them and asked them to stop. He showed his ID, and it turned out that the guy in the suit belonged to the Fan family. At one time, Bean dreamed of going to the Fan's house, but was refused because he was not fully awakened. The man in the suit warned that the guy had violated the rules of the Awakening Association, but the first time he would only be given a warning. After some time, Tony finished his workout and left the gym outside. Vanessa was already waiting for him there. She approached the guy and spoke to him first. She said she wanted to thank him for his help a few days ago. However, the hero looked as if he had seen the most terrible creature in the world. He tried to get away from the girl and not look at her, not talk. Vanessa was not very pleased that the guy looked like he had seen something nasty. She decided not to pay attention and introduced herself to him, thanking him for his help. However, Tony didn't listen to her at all. All his attention was focused on something else. He looked at the girl's green jacket that flashed before his eyes. The guy was annoyed that the neckline of her sweater was asymmetrical. Tony fought to keep himself from reaching out and correcting him. Vanessa did not notice his torment and clarified why the guy behaved this way. After a while, Tony couldn't help himself and screamed loudly. Immediately after that, he extended his hand to the girl and put it on her shoulder. The guy straightened the girl's jacket, but she had already misunderstood his actions. Vanessa swung her hand and slapped our hero in the face with all her might. The girl was very angry that the guy dared to touch her body without her permission. And at this time, the girl's bodyguards were watching them from the bushes. They were ready to interfere in their conversation, but held back with all their might. Vanessa screamed loudly at Tony for daring to touch her like that. However, he made a disgusting expression on his face and told the girl to stop dressing like that. Vanessa misunderstood his words and noticed that what she wore was none of his business. However, she decided to give the guy a chance to explain himself since he once helped her. But Tony decided not to use it, simply turning around and walking away. Vanessa was furious that this guy groped her and then dared to ignore her. The girl immediately turned to her bodyguards for help and ordered them to watch the guy. After everything that happened, the hero was glad to just calmly walk around the city. During the last training session, the guy's perception and physical fitness improved several levels. Tony noticed that real combat has the advantage of allowing you to increase your skills faster. However, immediately after this, he receives a new task that needed to be completed. Also, recently the guy noticed that the stronger his disorder, the faster his perception, the faster he increases his level. He also discovered that by using perception, he could usually learn new skills through simple observation. Thanks to this, his skill can improve many times over. Tony felt as if there was no limit and he could exceed his 100% limit several times in a row. If he continues to train, he may even be able to exceed his target by 300%. The guy had no idea what this system was and what it wanted from him, but he believed that he could go beyond its limits and free himself from pop-up notifications. To complete this task, he needed to prepare properly and try to complete all the tasks as quickly as possible. Because of this, Tony formed his own daily routine, starting his workouts at 5 a.m. Then he went to the shower and did household chores until 8 a.m. The guy also got himself a special planner to mark the completion of all daily tasks. Only after the plan was fully implemented could the guy breathe easy and go about his business further. So this time, the young man completed his morning routine and headed to the elevator. An old neighbor met him there and asked if the guy had closed the door before leaving. This provoked a new quirk in his head, and Tony seemed to get an electric shock. He immediately rushed back into the apartment to check if he had really closed the door. The guy was convinced of this, then went to school, and only there was he able to breathe out calmly. Suddenly, a group of guys from the boxing gym who had been harassing him recently appeared right in front of him. However, instead of fighting, they suddenly bowed and greeted him. The champion announced that the members of their boxing club had unanimously chosen Tony as their new leader. They announced this publicly and hoped that their new leader would lead their bright future. But for Tony, it looked like they were attacking him and constantly demanding something. So the guy asked to be left alone and tried to escape. On the way, he met his friend Lucy, who greeted him cheerfully. However, Tony walked past her, trying to hide from the crowd of boxers. The school children were already actively discussing rumors that this guy was the heir to 4 families. The hero tried to hide from his pursuers around the corner and did not understand when he became so unlucky. Suddenly, he was approached by strange men who introduced themselves as envoys of the Fan family. They gave him an invitation to join the Awoken training squad. The men explained that after the awakening of monsters several years ago, the world was no longer so safe. That's why they invited the guy to join them. But he was interested in something else. Tony wanted to know what he would get in return for his participation in their club. The strange men in front of Tony immediately opened a box containing offerings for him. It was the perfect set of blades, the perfect color, shape, even the perfect size. Our hero did not want to give up such a wonderful gift, so he grabbed it. Tony promised to think about the Fan family's offer to join them. Immediately after this, the guy said goodbye to the strange man, took the chest, and went about his business. Suddenly, a notification appeared in front of him that the guy had crossed some strange barrier and energy fluctuations had been detected. The notification said that there were enemies around him and he needed to prepare for battle. Tony looked around, but saw only one man in traditional clothing in front of him. He immediately realized that something was clearly wrong with this guy in front of him. However, before Tony could finish his thought, he sensed danger behind him. The guy grabbed his new chest tighter and turned around sharply. Behind him, Tony saw a huge snake that was about to attack him. The strange man in traditional attire was not at all surprised. On the contrary, he looked animated. The huge snake did not waste time and immediately attacked our hero. The guy barely managed to dodge at the last moment, and his chest fell, opened, and the blade scattered. A notice in front of the hero's eyes indicated that he was attacked by a level D python. Tony tried to escape, but was stopped by an artificial barrier that could not be overcome due to the lack of B-rank power. And at this time, the huge snake continued to attack our hero, not paying attention to his attempts to escape. In addition to physical attacks, the snake emitted a poisonous mist from its throat. Tony managed to avoid defeat only thanks to the protective function of his gloves, which he received as a reward earlier. Thanks to the fact that the defense was activated, the guy realized that he was real. Only now he realized that all this was not an illusion, but a real battle. So the guy tried to avoid as much injury as possible, constantly dodging. The strange man knew that in fact they were now in a magical trap, which was located dozens of miles from the school. Therefore, the monster was also real. You had to either fight it or die. The man wondered how long this guy could last in battle. For a while, Tony tried to dodge, but quickly realized that he needed to go on the offensive. The guy tried to use his practice blow and attack the snake. However, her skin was so strong that he could not even penetrate it. Instead, Tony had to retreat again and take a few steps back. The guy looked carefully at his hand and noticed that his trained fist was covered in blood. This snake had good protective armor, so he needed a weapon. Suddenly, the girl remembered that he had just recently been given new blades. Tony decided to use them and immediately rushed back to the box that was lying on the ground. The hero, with lightning speed, grabbed the first blade he came across in his hand and prepared to attack. He knew he couldn't escape this place, but he could try. After which, the guy pushed off the ground and tried to plunge the blade into the body of the snake. He tried to break through the monster's scales again and again, but he couldn't. The man watching the fight realized that the guy had about an F rank or even less. Therefore, he did not understand at all why this weak guy attracted the attention of their commander. Tony still couldn't break through the monster's scales, but he noticed that he was again developing in real combat. At first, he was scared, but now he doesn't want to fight this giant. If he continued and used his perception, he would be able to recognize her weaknesses. The guy concentrated and saw the weak point of the snake, attacking exactly at it. This time, he managed to break through the scales, but it was not enough. The snake only became even more angry and began to attack our hero with great zeal. Suddenly, the same strange man intervened in the schoolboy's fight and stopped him. He ordered the guy to pay attention to the monster behind them. The man only had a few seconds to deal with the monster and remove the barrier. As soon as Tony landed on the ground, the situation around him began to return to its original state. The guy immediately realized that the man in front of him was incredibly strong. He was able to defeat the monster Tony was fighting with one precise blow. His gaze fell down, and the hero noticed that the blades from the suitcase were scattered in a chaotic manner. Because of his illness, the hero immediately rushed to straighten them so that they lay flat. At this time, the man came closer and introduced himself as the HR director of the Fang family training squad named Fang Dong. The man looked at the guy's stunned face and thought that he had managed to impress him. However, in reality, it was an unusual illness of our hero. In his opinion, the previous blow of the man with which he killed the monster was truly perfect. For such a guy with OCD, they seemed like the pinnacle of perfection. The hero was impressed by this and wanted to be able to deliver the same perfect blows. That's why he wanted to join the Fan family's training squad to find an example of ideal strength there. Tony just wanted to quickly get rid of this strange system, but the man did not know this at all and was surprised. Meanwhile, Lucy was running across the schoolyard and looking for her friend, who didn't even say hello to her. The girl saw her friend from afar, who stood opposite another man. Lucy immediately recognized the director of the Fan, who was a very famous person in the city. She heard her friend and the director agreeing on something for tomorrow. After the man left, the girl came around the corner and turned to her friend. She asked if the guy was really okay if the Fan family was looking for him. Tony replied that he was fine, after which Lucy hugged him tightly. The girl was worried that Tony had suffered some internal injuries due to running so fast. However, at this moment, the hero only dreamed that the girl would move at least a meter away from him. He hated it when people invaded his personal space. Just the idea of being surrounded by a crowd of people made the guy feel bad. Although Tony noticed that Lucy looked absolutely clean and didn't irritate him that much, the girl promised to protect her friend if others began to bother him. Lucy didn't like it when Tony lectured her to be careful. Last time she went looking for a bully, so she could very well get into trouble. During their conversation, someone watched the couple from around the corner and eavesdropped. Tony asked Lucy how the girl knew about the Fan family because he himself had never heard of it before. The friend said that the Fang family is one of the 4 top clans, which has become a supplier of dungeon resources for the Ministry of Defense. This is a force to be reckoned with, controlling 10% of the city's total resources. Just at this time, the heiress of the Fang family arrived at the administration building and was getting out of the family car. This was the same Vanessa who had recently introduced herself to our hero. This time, the girl was dressed more formally and was on her way to work. She entered the building accompanied by one of her bodyguards and headed to the head office. Fang Dong couldn't get enough of his mistress and how graceful she looked. The girl asked the master how his meeting with Tony recently went. The man noticed that the guy agreed to join them, but his strength is rather useless and not worthy of attention. He tried to offer to introduce the girl to several worthy newcomers, but she rejected him and ordered him to keep an eye on the guy. Vanessa reminded that the master should not allow beginners to be lazy and should not be carefully prepared. Vanessa hoped that when Tony showed up at their training camp, things would become much more interesting. The master turned to the newcomers and said that the lady was equally interested in everyone, so everything depended on their diligence. He began to command them and tell them what to especially pay attention to. He also focused on how beautiful his young mistress's gait was. The man praised Vanessa so much that she heard it and began to worry. Because of this excitement, the girl could not concentrate and accidentally twisted her ankle. She was saved from falling by one of the bodyguards, who was nearby in time. However, even this situation was presented by the master as if the lady was too ideal for this world. On one of the top floors of a high-rise building, a man stood in his office and looked at the city. It was the head of the family, Fan Dillon, who was waiting for his daughter to appear. A moment later, the door to his office opened and Vanessa herself walked in. The man did not understand why his daughter wanted to go to a regular school, being so wealthy. However, the girl noticed that she was not an awakened huntsman, so she was just an ordinary girl. Her father remarked that she would become the boss, and the manager would not have to worry about power. The man has already found those who will support the girl in the future. He heard that his daughter recently became interested in a particular person and sent a master to find him. Vanessa said that the master volunteered himself and even sent a monster to test the new guy. She personally watched as the guy passed the test and agreed to join the ranks of the Fan family. That is why the girl felt that Tony would be stronger than she first thought. A few days later, the weekend arrived and many people gathered at the Fan family's training field. Our hero Tony was one of those newcomers who came there for the first time. Around him there were a lot of people in a wide variety of clothes. They all had weapons with them that looked very expensive. Tony thought it was better for him to keep his distance because some of these people looked dangerous. The discussion around him was that all the resources of the dungeon are controlled by the 4 main clans, which is why there are so many people who want to join the ranks. Tony walked a little forward and got his waiting number from one of the administrators, after which everyone who received a serial number was asked to undergo selection. This is how your rank was determined, which is fixed and very few can fully awaken their abilities. Most of the awakened ones are at the lowest level, of which only 1% are people with abilities of rank D and above. There are only less than 10 S-rank hunters, some of whom are strong enough to rule an entire country. Here, in reality, their city's army is subordinate to a foreigner, the only S-rank hunter in Bonnie City. Gradually, the huge queue decreased, and finally our hero approached the identifying device, and he was asked to bring his hands closer so that it could test his strength. A couple of moments later, the ball announced that our hero was a rank F huntsman and had no job. Levels below D are considered very weak, so no classes are provided for them. Higher ranks are divided into warriors, mages, archers, assassins, spellcasters, and healers. Tony watched as the people around him were happy or sad about their rank. However, he was still jealous even of those who received the E rank because he had the lowest. Suddenly, the crowd began to shout joyfully, which attracted the attention of our hero. It turned out that one of the recruits had received a D-level rank, which was very rare. It was a young, strong guy in metal armor who was coming down the stairs. There were envious people hovering around him, but Tony was worried about something. And he looked at the information board and thought about how strong he would become if he completed the remaining 99% of the task. Immediately afterwards, all the rookies, including the hero, went to the recruit training center. There they were told that they were all wearing uniforms and becoming recruits of the Fan family. From that moment on, the man promised to become their teacher in the use of various types of weapons. Legend has it that in ancient times there was a unique martial art that could channel inner strength. By concentrating it inside the sword, recruits can hit targets miles away. He added that although those gathered are awakened, their abilities are nothing compared to the legendary power. But along with abilities, the true power of the awakened lies in how they handle their weapons. Differences in angle, force, and speed can affect the destructive force of an impact. Immediately after these words, the man concentrated and made one quick strike with his sword. It didn't look very strong, but it was enough to cut all the tubes several times. The blow was so perfect that it completely impressed our hero. The rest of the recruits gathered here were also amazed by the skill of their master's fencing. What was even more surprising was that their teacher was not a fighting type, but a magician. However, what impressed our hero most of all now was the perfect and precise blows this man delivered. It seemed that he could handle absolutely any weapon that existed in this world. He demonstrated blows with an axe, a spear, katanas, swords, and other types of weapons. Absolutely every mastery of the instrument was achieved at an incredible level. After the demonstration, all newcomers went directly to the hall for weapons training. There they practiced their skills, but many of them very quickly fizzled out. Some of the recruits belonged to the magical type and did not see the point in owning weapons. However, Master Dong heard their words and said that the guys were deeply mistaken in their reasoning. He noticed that without mastery of weapons, they would not get into even the weakest team, so he sent everyone to train. Although the recruits went on to practice, not all did so. Among the new guys, there was one strange guy who tirelessly practiced the same blow. This was our hero, whom the system forced to repeat the same blow over and over again. The guy even closed his eyes on purpose so as not to see the notification every minute. He relentlessly repeated the stance and struck until the notice disappeared. The guy was insanely exhausted, but his illness was stronger than his fatigue. He felt that he had very little time left to achieve the ideal, so he continued to train. Finally, Tony put all the strength he had left into one of the blows. It was very difficult after a long workout. The guy's hands were shaking from fatigue. Fortunately, it was at this moment that the guy achieved the perfect execution of the stance and was able to increase his level. And the rest of the newcomers watched our hero and did not understand why such a weak guy was practicing his blows so diligently. However then, without much delay, our hero took up a new type of weapon. He stopped only when he reached the maximum level of mastery of a new type of weapon. The last thing on the plan was the medieval sword, but the eldest did not show the ideal attack, so the hero had to learn it himself. A week passed, during which each of the recruits had to find a suitable weapon and demonstrate their experience in using it. Most of the newcomers immediately rushed into the fighting room to demonstrate what they had learned during this time. However, there was one newcomer who had no intention of joining them, but stubbornly continued to practice primitive movements. The newcomers didn't understand why the guy was wasting his time in the training room if everyone was here to hunt monsters. Most people thought that his abilities did not change after awakening, so further training was not necessary. Therefore, most of them focused on killing monsters and did not know how to develop their abilities further. Among themselves, the newcomers were discussing the same guy who was waving a weapon in the training room, even though he was the weakest among them. The rumors that the guy was personally chosen by someone from the Fan family were heard by people passing by. The guy in the suit was surprised that there were still such strange relatives in their family. Fang Chong believed that Fang Dong was becoming more stupid as he grew older and was wasting his time. Lately, he had been followed on his heels by a recruit who had recently received level D and now wanted to become famous. The guy knew that Fang Chong was going to marry Vanessa, so he wanted to stay close to him. He bowed to the young man, called him master, and asked him for help. The young heir was pleasantly surprised by such sycophancy and promised to put in a good word for the guy at headquarters. Young Berserker was very grateful to his new master and said that he treated him like a father. All this time in the training room, our hero suggested practicing the same last blow. After some time, he brought his mastery of the last type of weapon to the maximum level and stopped. As a reward for this, he received the inner strength skill, which increased his performance by 25%. Thanks to this, the guy could use his willpower to inflict more damage on the target with the weapon he had mastered. This was the very skill his teacher had talked about, so the hero was eager to try it out in battle. The hero went to the duel room with everyone else and for the first time saw the portal to the combat zone, which looked very impressive. However, he noticed that the senior mentor did not let everyone in. The portal to the combat zone is intended exclusively for those who have received level D and above. Everyone present felt that it was unfair that they could not use the portal solely based on their rank. However, rules are rules, so preference was given to those who were more talented. The main rule of this world was built on the principle that the fittest survive. Awakened of high rank can go to better levels of the dungeon and receive more valuable resources. In every group or guild, 90% of the loot always goes to the top and most capable. At this time, the weak can only act as support, covering their backs, or while they are crushed like ants during guild wars. Therefore, the master advised to blame only fate for your weakness and take what they give. Tony didn't like the fact that people with low levels could only accept the fact that they were failures. So our hero stepped forward and said that a person's strength is not determined by rank alone. The master did not like this, and the guys began to argue among themselves, but they were unexpectedly interrupted. The hand of one of those who entered there earlier emerged from the huge portal. The guy noticed that they needed help, for which they promised a reward. The guys needed several volunteers, and our hero volunteered as one. The awakened one did not specify anything further and simply asked if anyone else was going to join them. Several people volunteered to help clear the dungeon, after which they went inside the portal. This was not a real dungeon, just a simulation of a D-level dungeon. However, the boss of this dungeon was too strong because he possessed not only combat skills, but also magic. In addition to the strong boss, small demons kept appearing continuously, getting in the way and getting in the way. Berserker's partners tried to persuade him to retreat and not take so many risks. However, the guy remembered that Fang Chun promised to make him a captain if he completed this mission. That is why the guy did not want to give up and run away, but continued to fight the monster. The boss of this dungeon was too strong even for him, but Berserker was not going to retreat. The guy with the last of his strength repelled the monster's attacks and hoped that help would soon come to them. He even sent another person to check where the first one went for help. Just at this time, our company had just entered the portal and found itself in a dungeon. Tony and the other recruits were inside the simulation for the first time and were impressed by the environment. It was an underground city for combat training, which created a destructive aura. The guys had to hurry up to help those who were fighting the main boss. Meanwhile, Berserker could not withstand the onslaught of the huge monster and flew back. During the battle, he had let go of his weapon and was now lying on the ground completely unprotected. But just at that moment, help came and the guy was able to breathe a sigh of relief. However, he looked at the assistants and immediately recognized among them the same weakling who had been endlessly practicing his blows. However, there was nothing to be done, so Berserker ordered some of the guys to surround the monster and distract it. He ordered our hero and another weak magician to remain in the cordon and clear out the lower demons. Our hero's partner looked completely frightened and did not understand at all what he should do. Then one of the older recruits shouted at him and said that the guys should attack the monsters in any way they could. However, Tony noticed that these demons do not attack them unless they themselves show hostility. That is why he immediately drew his weapon, which attracted the attention of one of the demons. It was a huge monster in a black cloak, which immediately rushed at our hero. However, the guy was waiting for this in order to test his new abilities. This was quite a difficult opponent for a beginner, but it was time to try out the new fencing style that he had mastered. The horror that the demon inspired in our hero was different from what he felt when he fought with the python for the first time. Now for Tony, this demon was just an ordinary monster and nothing more. So the guy concentrated and delivered his only strong blow to the demon's shoulder. This was the first time the guy used this blow in battle after intense training. However, the blow was not yet good enough to kill the demon the first time. Thus, Tony continued to fight one demon after another. He struck them, and each time tried to improve his skills and increase the power of damage. The newcomer even looked at his partner, and his equanimity thought that the demon was very weak. Therefore, he believed in himself and decided to also attack his opponent. The guy decided to start with one of the simple blows and attack the demon from behind. However, this did not cause him any damage. It only made him angry and drew attention to the guy. The magician thought the monsters were too scary, so he was afraid of him. He froze in place and began to tremble in fear of what our hero Tony saw. At the last moment, he managed to substitute his sword and protect his partner from the monster's attack. The guy noticed that a monster of this level is actually not as scary as it seems at first glance. While our hero was fighting with small demons, the squad leader at that time was confronting the boss. The berserker was worried that during the entire battle, the glow of the enemy's sword had not gone out. That is why he decided to call on all his strength and use his signature technique. Out of 10,000 level D awakened people, he was the only one who had this mutation. It allowed him to instantly increase his defense and power during battle. The commander and his assistants decided to attack the boss together using their secret weapon. And at this time, at the other end of the dungeon, our hero fought with another demon. He didn't like that his partner was sitting uselessly on the ground and doing nothing. He ordered the guy to help him clear the dungeon, but he was too scared. Instead of helping, the boy turned around and ran to the exit from the dungeon to go home. All this happened at the same time as the main attacking team attacked the boss. The commander did not understand why, after strengthening him, the monster was still not defeated. The guy also noted that due to fatigue, he was moving slower and slower. He even theorized that the monster's sword causes a paralysis effect on its opponent. At that moment, the commander noticed that one of the newcomers was running home. However, he could not do anything about it, because he himself was paralyzed right in the air. It seemed like this was what the dungeon boss had been waiting for all along. The commander could not move even while the monster's sword was rushing at him with all his might. Literally with one powerful blow, the boss killed the berserker and made him disappear from the dungeon. In a dungeon, movement is automatically triggered when the subject receives a killing blow. The subordinates began to flee after they saw that the strongest of them had been defeated. The first among them was the same newcomer who volunteered to help. He ran out of the dungeon and faced the disapproving glances of his comrades. Only in the training room was the guy able to breathe calmly and try to catch his breath from the fast run. He raised his head and saw in front of him the commander who had just fought with the main boss. Berserker's assistants believed that their defeat was the newcomer's fault, so they decided to beat him. The guy tried to justify himself by saying that he was simply afraid of ghosts and did not expect this. The commander saw how his charges were protecting him, so he believed in their words. The guy could not admit that he lost because of his weakness, so he ordered the culprit to be beaten. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, our hero was left alone and continued to fight monsters. He defeated one demon after another, mastering the power of his blows. After some time, he didn't notice that he had cleared out all the lower-level demons. Only after that did he notice that only the boss remained in the dungeon, and his partner had disappeared. The guy noticed that the boss's health was significantly reduced. He couldn't watch his teammates leave and not finish what they started. Therefore, the hero decided to fight the boss on his own in order to bring his health bar to 0. Thanks to the system, the young man could see all the characteristics of this monster, its weak points. Only now the guy admitted that the system was not completely useless and often helped him. First of all, he decided to use his signature blow, which he had been practicing before. However, the monster easily blocked his attack and threw the guy back. The hero noted that the most important thing is to let the non-monster paralyze your body. Tony saw this battle as an excellent opportunity to fully master his new ability. He used the additional characteristics of his protective gloves and rushed into battle. And at this time in the training hall, the newcomers continued to beat the poor magician. Several guys held his hands, and the squad leader hit him in the face and body. The guy sincerely believed that if he had not been distracted by this guy, he could have defeated the boss. In the crowd, someone tried to object, but they were quickly silenced so as not to become next. Despite the fact that among the crowd there were people with abilities, none of them dared to stop the commander and confront the strong. This went on for some time until the silence in the training room was suddenly interrupted by someone's loud scream. Everyone present turned their attention to the place from where it came. It was our hero who came out of the portal and accused the commander of taking advantage of his position. Our hero ordered the captain to blame only himself for his failures. The newcomers were surprised that such a weakling would allow himself to insult one of the strongest. After our hero's words, Berserker flew into a rage and dropped his victim. The young magician was already unconscious and collapsed like a stone onto the cold floor. At this time, Berserker and his assistants were very angry and demanded to repeat the guy's accusations. The hero was not one of the timid and happily repeated that he considered the commander a coward once again. After all, recently he was left completely alone in the dungeon and fought against the boss. Despite fatigue and exhaustion, our hero struck the monster again and again. The boss was so strong that it completely dissipated the protective power of his gloves. The hero knew that the enemy's sword had a paralyzing effect that he could not resist. That is why he needed to clearly calculate the time for the final blow and deliver it. However, the guy did not despair and tried to attack the monster with all his might. This bore fruit, because gradually his health scale was decreasing. The hero was happy that his plan was working, so he tried even better. He tried to combine different types of attacks to make it more difficult for the monster to defend against them. During the fight, Tony clearly remembered the movement his teacher performed. With each blow, the guy improved his skills more and increased his strength. After some time in their battle, the boss's health was practically 0. This time, the young man decided to use the blow that the master delivered with an axe. He brought it down directly on the monster's head, hoping to inflict more damage on it. The guy was immensely happy to see that the boss's health bar was completely empty. However, instead of his long-awaited victory, something unexpected happened. Another monster burst out of the monster's body, which looked like a huge demon. This demon seemed to swallow our hero inside himself and poison him. After this, Tony immediately felt incredible pain that made him numb. The guy remembered that inner strength skills have special conditions for activation. In order to use inner strength, A person must be on the verge of death. Our hero's body was in terrible condition. The system was sounding the alarm. After a couple of moments, she announced that the conditions for activating the inner power had been met. Immediately after this, the hero's attack power and defensive power were increased, and his health was completely restored. Thanks to the removal of the negative effect, Tony was able to free himself from his captivity. The guy used one of his learned punches to break free from the cage. With the help of internal energy and his blade, he seemed to cut the demon in half. Having done this, the guy landed on the ground and waited for the next attack. However, instead, a huge magical crystal landed next to him. The system announced that this was a reward for defeating the Ghost General, which gave additional skills. It allowed you to study the afterlife fencing skill that the boss owned. Our hero decided to appropriate this skill, so he squeezed his hand and broke the crystal to activate it. Immediately after, he was surrounded by a glowing aura that gradually fed into his body. Then inscriptions appeared around the hero in a language unknown to him, which gradually disappeared. Immediately after this, the hero opened the skill window to check what he had achieved thanks to this victory. The guy was disappointed that after all these tests, he only advanced the beginner's fencing abilities by 10%. That is why he was so angry and decided to provoke the escaped commander. The berserker could not tolerate such humiliation, so he rushed to attack the newcomer. However, our hero easily dodged all his blows, making the guy look like a fool. This only angered the commander even more, who became more accurate in his strikes. At some point, Tony became so bold that he decided to block him. The guy easily stopped the commander's fist and squeezed it so hard that it hurt him. Berserker didn't understand why this newcomer had such enormous power. Immediately after this, the guys went in different directions and decided to attack each other. The berserker did not want to show his weakness and fear, so he decided not to retreat during this battle. However, they were suddenly distracted by someone's ringing voice, which was heard throughout the entire training room. The guys who had been fighting each other before suddenly froze and looked around. It was Vanessa, accompanied by her bodyguards, who came and asked who allowed them to organize a showdown here. In fact, some time ago, the Fang family's workers were watching what was happening on surveillance cameras. One of the guys noticed how a weak newcomer defeated the dungeon boss. However, he pretended that nothing had happened so that his colleagues would not see it. The guy thought it was some kind of data error because the newbie couldn't handle the Ghost General. That is why the guy decided to delete it and restart the program so that no one would know about it. However, no one noticed that suddenly the dungeon behind the fighters was closed because everyone was busy. Vanessa asked if the guys knew what the consequences of fighting in the training area for new recruits would be. However, the senior master decided to intervene in the conversation and asked what the girl was doing here. The recruits were very impressed by the incredible appearance of their mistress. The girl couldn't believe that the newcomers decided to start a fight right in front of their boss. She drew attention to the beaten guy and asked what happened here. The master tried to pretend that this guy was too weak and got hurt during training. That is why the girl ordered one of her bodyguards to examine the young man. She also ordered the doctors from the newcomers to provide first aid to the guy. The girl did not believe that a guy could get such injuries in a dungeon simulator. The magician wanted to thank his mistress, but the doctor ordered him to remain silent. After some time, the bodyguard returned and told the girl what really happened. Vanessa was disappointed that the senior master dared to lie to her face. The girl believed that she was responsible for the actions of the newcomers who belonged to the Fan family. She was amazed that the strong awakened dared to bully the weaker ones. She also scolded everyone present for watching and not trying to help their comrade. Vanessa was angry that after doing this, people would not be able to trust their comrades in the future. It was because of this that Vanessa decided to exclude Berserker from the training group. The squad leader could not believe that he would be expelled from the squad because of this incident. The senior master tried to protect the guy because he was one of the best students among all the newcomers. However, the girl noticed that the master had no right to stand up for the guy because he allowed the students to fight and lied. Immediately afterwards, the bodyguards grabbed the two expelled men and dragged them towards the exit. Vanessa felt she had done a good job as the future head of the family. The newcomers were impressed by how majestic, noble, and beautiful their heiress was. Suddenly, the girl turned her attention to our hero, who also took part in the fight. She approached the guy and asked if he remembered them about their meeting near the university. However, Tony looked so scared that he couldn't say anything. The girl believed that he behaved this way because of inappropriate behavior in the past. She hoped that the guy would bow down to her as an apology for that incident. However, the hero called her clothes disgusting and asked her not to come so close to him. These words pierced the girl to the very heart and greatly surprised the others. Vanessa got angry after her boyfriend said her shirt was not symmetrical and was a different color. The bodyguards noticed that their mistress was angry every time she met this guy. Suddenly, another guy who had not been here before intervened in the conversation of the two. Fang Chun brought Berserker back and told him not to kick him out just because of a fight. The newcomers were surprised that this guy could talk to the heiress so freely. Vanessa noticed that the squad leader bullied others, so she couldn't let him stay. However, Chun said that he accepted this guy into his team, and now he will personally take on his upbringing. He put his hand on the girl's shoulder and asked her to let him figure it out himself. Vanessa felt uncomfortable, so she pushed his hand off her shoulder. The guy suggested that the victim take revenge on his offender and beat him back. Immediately after this, he noticed the little guy who had been sitting on the floor all this time. However, he began to refuse, knowing full well that in the future he would get it for this. Tony realized that this was a good move, because no one would dare to hit the commander and the matter would have to be hushed up. This is what happened, because Fang Chun suggested that the conflict be considered settled. However, our hero was not satisfied with this, so he volunteered to hit instead of the victim. The commander reminded that our hero is the guy who was personally chosen by Master Fang Dong. Chun noticed that this was wrong because the commander did not touch him. However, Tony replied that he just wanted to end their battle and emerge victorious. He suggested that the loser leave the training camp, which caused Vanessa concern. The guy still couldn't look at his boss because her appearance annoyed him. Fang Chung watched their interaction and began to get really angry because of how close they seemed. That is why he allowed the fight to continue and ordered Berserker to hit with all his might. The battle of the newcomers began, and all the spectators were amazed that our hero was not inferior to anyone in strength. The commander and Tony continued to attack each other with equal strength. Berserker was annoyed that this upstart newcomer was so strong. He was extremely angry that the hero forced him to take extreme measures. Immediately after that, the guy called on his power and decided to use a special attack. She allowed him to move several times faster, but this was not enough. Even his increased strength did not help the guy overcome our hero. Tony successfully avoided all of his attacks and still stayed upright. The guy looked at his opponent and realized that he was going to kill him. In this case, Tony decided to try out his new ability on his enemy. Thanks to her, he could increase his strength and also inflict a paralyzing effect on the enemy. With just one strong blow, Tony cut his opponent's sword into several pieces. This shocked Berserker so much that he literally fell to his knees. The guy was shocked that some weak newcomer could break his weapon. All spectators were impressed by the abilities of this very newcomer. However, Fang Chung noticed that our hero was using a special afterlife sword art in a very strange way. But still, the guy admitted the defeat of his ward and promised to expel him from the squad. Immediately after this, he suggested that the newcomer be tested again to eliminate the mistake. Tony was against it because he didn't care about his level at all. However, Vanessa convinced the guy that this would only benefit him. Fang Chun promised to enlist the hero in his sabotage squad if he turns out to be right. After some time, Tony was again lying on the table and being examined. Only now this was carried out on a more accurate apparatus, which was used by the elders in the family. Fang Chun and Vanessa were waiting for the results that the researcher would tell them. The girl said that the guy was indeed of the lowest rank, and the equipment was fully operational. After these words, Fang Chung was sure that the hero was unable to defeat the Ghost General. Tony immediately realized that the machine was unable to assess his strength because of the system. Fang Chun suggested that Vanessa deliberately change the boss's parameters to help her protege win. So he invited the hero to join the reconnaissance group and go to the dungeon. Today, the guy went through a simulation on a simulator. Now he was offered to visit a real dungeon. Vanessa tried to stop her friend because it was too dangerous. Tony hoped that in a real dungeon he could improve his skills faster. That's why he agreed and was going to greet his new boss. However, he noticed that before shaking hands, Fang Chung stopped and pulled the glove onto his hand. Only after that did he shake hands with our hero with his gloved hand. The heir warned that the dungeon could be very dangerous and they would face difficulties. The dungeon was connected to another world from which monsters constantly emerge. The Awakened killed these monsters to obtain crystals that gave enormous power. In the last few decades, new dungeons have begun to appear around the world. In order to gain control over a decent number of dungeons, the 4 main families gathered into special groups consisting of carefully selected people. In front of one of these portals, there was a group that belonged to the Fan family. Sabotage Squad number 18 consisted of 4 people who were waiting for their new recruit. After a while, their boss Fang Chun appeared, leading the recruit. The guys knew that they would have a new addition to their squad. but they saw him for the first time now. Fang Chung introduced the F-rank newcomer and asked him to take care of him. Immediately after this, the guys from the squad hurried to go inside the dungeon. The captain of the squad was level C. Next to him was a Dr. Doe of rank D. The remaining 2 awakened D ranks were also unhappy that they were given such a weak partner. The guys were afraid that in the dungeon they would have to spend a lot of time defending it. But the newcomer stepped into the portal of a real dungeon with them and froze in surprise. It was his first time seeing a real dungeon, so he was impressed by its size and appearance. The system informed the hero that he was in a level C dungeon inhabited by worms. The guy hoped that the worms would look fairly symmetrical so that they wouldn't hurt to look at. The squad leader ordered the newcomer not to look around, but to concentrate on the matter at hand. The guys went deep into the dungeon, gradually clearing all the passages. It was immediately clear that they had been working together for quite a long time and harmoniously. The healer immediately increased the health of all her companions, after which they fought the monsters. In each of the tunnels, different types of worms were waiting for the guys, which they successfully killed. Tony thought that the healer had accidentally forgotten to buff him only. However, he did not want to deal with this moment and rushed to help his comrades. Each of the squad had good combat skills and could fight monsters on their own. Sometimes there were too many monsters and dangerous situations arose. However, at such moments, the guys helped each other and covered their backs. The squad leader was surprised that the newcomer was not afraid of the first dungeon. The guy noticed that our hero is quite strong for the owner of the weakest rank. The medic observed the situation and realized that this guy would be quite difficult to eliminate. Thanks to her abilities, for short periods of time, the girl could control monsters and control them at will. And now she used her spell on one of the monsters and forced it to submit to her will. She came up with a great idea to create a small accident in the dungeon. The doe watched as our hero fought with another worm. It was a rather strong monster, so it was not so easy for the heroes to deal with it. The monster's scales were so dense that the guy's sword quickly got stuck in it. Suddenly, the hero felt a special danger that came from his back. It seemed like everyone else in the squad had been waiting and watching for this moment. Suddenly, the monster rushed to attack its relative with whom Tony was fighting. If the guy had not managed to jump away at the last moment, he could well have ended up in the place of that worm. Immediately after this, all the monsters went crazy and began to purposefully attack our hero. One of them grabbed him by the clothes, and at that time, the second one crashed into him from behind. The team members were glad that the newcomer was killed by the monster, so they would not be blamed for anything. However, unexpectedly, the healer noticed something strange in the middle of the battle. The hero used his invulnerability ability and easily stopped both monsters with his bare hands. Immediately after this, he used the skills of the afterlife swordsmanship and created a whirlwind that spun the monsters and threw them into the air. After this, the hero delivered one precise and powerful blow, cutting the opponents in half. Thus, his battle ended, and the progress of the task reached 15%. The hero did not notice anything strange and asked if his partners had finished. Tony was surprised that in this dungeon the monsters dissolve after they die. After this, the guy invited his comrade-in-arms to move on and let them go ahead. The commander knew the way, so he went first in the middle of the group. Tony noticed that all the monsters were crawling out of a nearby tunnel and suggested going there. However, the commander noticed that in that dungeon there are only weak monsters, and they need a boss. The hero was uneasy if they could not clear the dungeon completely, so he suggested going there on his own. The doctor assumed that the hero noticed her attack and decided to check it out. In this case, the commander sent the girl after the newcomer so that she could follow him and, if possible, kill him. The doe hurried after our hero Tony and said that she would go with him. She was a magician, so she could heal the hero's wounds and help him from a distance. The guy was worried that others might need her help, but the girl reassured him. After this, the commander suggested that those remaining fight the boss and not delay the payment of their reward. The deeper the hero went into the tunnel, the darker and gloomier everything around him became. However, his partner could take care of it and illuminated everything around with her magic. Now our hero could see the monsters they had to fight. These turned out to be huge cannibal ants that hunted in packs. Tony ordered the healer to illuminate everything around him, and he rushed into battle. He used the fastest and most accurate strikes to defeat monsters. He attacked each ant one by one, trying to completely clear the tunnel. The C-rank dungeon looked too weak after training in the D-rank dungeon. The healer watched as the lowest-ranking newcomer easily defeated the monsters. After some time, Tony killed all the ants and completed the task by 30%. It happened so quickly that the doe did not have time to think of a reason to turn off the light in the tunnel. Therefore, the girl was forced to continue to accompany the newcomer and help him along the way. Suddenly, Tony thought that small creatures might be hiding in the extensions and stuck his hand in there. He asked the girl to help him look around, which aroused even more suspicion in her. So gradually, they moved further and further, clearing the dungeon by 60%. Half an hour later, they got out to the opposite side of the tunnel and reached a cliff. Tony only completed 60% of the mission, so he thought there should have been more monsters in this place. At that moment, the doctor came up with a great idea about how she could get rid of her partner. The girl quietly came closer to him and suddenly pushed him in the back. Tony did not expect such betrayal from his new partner at all. The girl asked not to blame her, but their master, whom the hero had upset earlier. The doe believed that the guy would not survive after falling into such a deep hole, so she calmly went back to her partners. However, our hero was not so weak and managed to stick his sword into the crevice during the fall. He was angry with Fang Chong, who ordered his men to kill him. The guy fell quite deep, so he couldn't see anything around him. He needed to get out when suddenly the hero noticed a strange light below. He decided to go down a little lower and began to gradually lower himself with the help of his sword. After some time, the guy almost reached the cave and saw strange water. The hero carefully jumped down and decided to look around him. However, he quickly found out that he was not alone in this cave. The guy looked back and saw a strange monster that came out of the shadows. These turned out to be huge butterflies that were hostile to him. The system warned about the toxicity of these insects and their abilities. The guy decided to listen to these clues and activated his inner strength. He used one of the skills he had recently acquired. Thanks to this, the hero was able to avoid the toxic effects of the butterflies and attack them. Thanks to the mastery of his sword, the guy was able to defeat these monsters quite quickly. Immediately afterwards, he completed the task at 70%. At the same second, a notification came that the dungeon boss had been defeated and the task was 99% completed. Tony assumed that his partners were too inattentive and missed some kind of monster. Meanwhile, at the other end of the dungeon, the main squad was fighting the boss. They were only able to kill him through joint efforts and rest. The commander ordered to collect all the magic crystals and move towards the exit. The teammates were disappointed by how low the reward was for winning and clearing this dungeon. After collecting materials, the partners moved back to the beginning of the cave and met with their doctor. The commander praised the girl for killing the newcomer and completing a special task from their superior. And at this time, the still-living hero was thinking that he had managed to miss some monster. He diligently searched the entire dungeon, but could not find the last monster. Suddenly, something brilliantly caught his attention in the middle of a pile of stones. The guy guessed that there was something under these stones, so he began to clear away the rubble. One of the corners of the altar had given way, so it was not symmetrical. The hero wondered if it was possible to fix it with the help of the pieces that were lying nearby. Because of his illness, the hero could not stop, so he completely put the altar in order. However, our guy was also confused by the fact that the golden tray was not in the center of the altar. Tony decided to fix it right away and carefully pushed it right into the center. After that, the guy could exhale and noticed that the altar looked much better. Suddenly, the system notified that the conditions for opening a secret dungeon had been met. At the bottom of the cave, a huge whirlpool appeared in the water. Then the water disappeared and a secret passage opened, which beckoned our hero. Tony moved closer and carefully walked to the edge of the hole. The guy looked down and hoped that the remaining 1% of monsters were waiting for him there. He collected his thoughts and jumped inside this tier to complete the task. There, Tony met a terrifying D-rank spider queen who could shoot poison. The hero was very surprised that he met a D-rank monster in the dungeon. However, he didn't have much time to think as the spider immediately began to attack him. Tony barely managed to dodge the web that was about to be rained down on him. Tony noticed that the monster had slow attacks, so he had a chance to win. However, quite unexpectedly, one of the monster's attacks changed its trajectory. She turned and rushed straight towards Tony, throwing her nets open. The hero did not expect an attack from behind, so he fell into this trap. During resistance, the nets began to emit poisonous gas, which caused pain. The more the guy resisted, the more damage he received. At this time, the spider pulled her web and dragged the guy along the ground. She opened her mouth and released a stream of poisonous steam directly towards him. The system immediately notified the hero that poison had been detected in his body. It was so strong that it instantly worsened the health of our hero. At some point, the guy even suggested that he would die in this dungeon, because with every second his strength left his body and he could no longer resist. Due to the neurotoxin, the hero's body went into a semi-conscious state and the degree of poisoning increased. Sometimes the hero would briefly come to his senses and be surprised that he was still alive. He watched as the spider dragged him along the ground to her lair. The guy noticed that there were 1,000 hungry eyes burning on the ceiling and walls around him. These were weaker monsters who were waiting for their mistress to return. The guy guessed that the spider wanted to feed him to her kids. At that moment, Tony remembered a conversation with his girlfriend that took place some time ago. Even then, Lucy told him that if he encounters a poisonous substance somewhere, then there is always an antidote nearby. If someone is poisonous, then only someone who has resistance to this poison can live next to him. That is why the hero, with the last of his strength, launched an analysis of the environment for the presence of an antidote. The poisoning progress was almost complete when suddenly the system stumbled upon something interesting. It turned out to be ginseng, which had detoxifying properties. After collecting the grass, the hero noticed that the process of his poisoning immediately stopped. However, he did not want to reduce the effect of the poison a little, so he immediately threw the plant away. Due to his illness, the hero wanted the poison scale to reach 100%. That is why he put the antidote aside and began to wait as the numbers replaced each other. After some time, the spider dragged him into the very depths of her lair and stopped. She ordered something to her children, so many spiders went towards their prey. The poisoning progress reached 100%, after which the system began analyzing the poison. After this, the hero received permanent resistance to this type of poison, and all his strength was restored. Immediately, Tony abruptly plucked the ginseng leaves that were next to him. The guy crushed them in his hand to speed up the detoxification process. Then after that, the guy rose to his feet and grabbed his favorite weapon. He began to kill the small spiders one by one to completely clear the dungeon. By this, he enraged the spider, who watched the death of her children. The monster couldn't come to terms with this, so she immediately began to attack our hero. However, Tony knew exactly who he was fighting, so he avoided all of her attacks. Only now, the guy didn't just dodge, but immediately stopped attempts to pin him down. He knew that when fighting such huge monsters, he could reduce the reach of their attacks by fighting at close range. That is why the guy tried to get as close to the monster as possible. The spider roared furiously because she couldn't kill this guy. Tony was getting closer and closer to the monster, avoiding its attacks, and was thinking about his next step. He remembered that the place where webs are stored is always the most unprotected for insects. This was the spider's most vulnerable spot, so Tony cut her body. Immediately after this, the guy ran a little to the side and began to observe the monster's reaction. The spider roared from unbearable pain and became even more furious. She used her ability to shoot webs and tried to patch herself up. The monster decided to attack our hero from above, so it climbed to the ceiling of the cave. She released another portion of extremely poisonous mucus towards the hero. However, this time our Tony easily managed to avoid a direct hit. In addition, he rushed to the ginseng thickets that were around him. The guy picked some of the plant and kept it in his fist as a reserve. Unfortunately, the hero was distracted and did not notice how one of the small spiders bit him on the leg. Because of the boss battle, he completely forgot about her 1,000 little children. Seeing this attitude towards her cubs, the spider became even more furious. Out of anger, the monster switched to its berserker form and became even stronger. This was Tony's first time fighting a monster that had several different forms. Now the spider could attack much faster, and her strength was also increased. However, the sequence of her attacks remained almost unchanged, so this did not particularly bother Tony. The guy again tried to attack the monster with his internal energy, but his attacks bounced off. His strongest skill did not work, so the hero had to dodge again. In the end, he found himself surrounded on all sides and could no longer move anywhere. Only now did Tony realize that the monster had thought about this moment from the very beginning. For the first time in his life, he encountered a truly very smart monster. Our hero was extremely upset that he did not think of cutting the web right away. Now, if he starts cutting her mindlessly, things will definitely get worse. The spider was incredibly happy that she managed to lure this man into her web. Now she could try to kill him as quickly as possible and avenge her children. The monster spat out another whole bunch of mucus in the direction of our hero Tony. However, the guy assumed this scenario and used the plant. After destroying the sprouts, the hero received approximately 30 seconds of resistance to any poison. He decided to take advantage of this time and tried to attack the spider. The monster resisted, and the hero had to use his inner strength skills to cut its web. He completed his attack and plunged his sword straight into the monster's belly, which was without armor. He turned the sword and released a stream of internal energy, directing it towards the enemy. This was enough to cause irreparable injury to the monster. Gradually, the web began to sag and tear, and the monster fell into pieces. Immediately afterwards, Tony landed gently on the ground and watched as the monster disappeared. Then the hero looked around and saw small spiders who begged him for mercy. However, the guy came to the dungeon precisely to destroy every single monster. After the fight ended, Tony was glad that the real fight had greatly improved his skills. Suddenly, the system announced that it had received a hidden reward, which was a puzzle piece. It was one small puzzle piece that was shaped like a jigsaw puzzle. Tony didn't want to bother collecting the fragments, so he threw it back over his shoulder. However, suddenly, the puzzle unfolded on its own and entered the system. Tony noticed that an image of the entire picture appeared in front of him. The guy was angry because the system was constantly complicating his life with new tasks. He was incredibly annoyed with his illness and screamed with rage. Energy fluctuations appeared in portals around the world, which were provoked by the appearance of a fragment of the god's bone. The most powerful worlds felt that something was about to happen. Fang Cheng listened to his group's report on how they went to the dungeon. The doctor assured that they had clearly completed the special task that was given to them. The boss was pleased and promised that the girl would receive a great reward. He approached her and said that he could do absolutely anything she asked. The girl was embarrassed by his behavior and said that she would be happy with any reward that the master offered her. The rest of the team preferred to pretend not to notice the strange communication. Fang Chun ordered the guys to leave the bills so he could transfer their reward to them later. He also ordered them to pretend to be unhappy at the loss of their partner when they were with other people. Immediately after this, the squad went to the evaluation hall to hand over the found artifacts. The team laid out all the extracted materials in front of the appraiser and waited for the final amount to be announced. The commission's information stated that the team consisted of 5 people, so the girl inquired about the presence of a 5th. The team began to cry that they had lost their weakest partner in battle. The evaluator was confused by the fact that people express their emotions so strongly, although this happens almost every day. She was about to tell the team the final amount when suddenly someone else appeared. It was our hero Tony, who said that he had a few more crystals. Everyone on the team was terribly surprised by his appearance, especially the healer. The guy immediately guessed that he had already been exposed as dead in front of the appraiser. The girl didn't care what was happening inside the group, so she ordered everyone to shut up. Immediately afterwards, Tony moved closer and emptied some of the crystals in his bag. This was possible thanks to a special ring that made it possible to store countless things. The girl was amazed that this one guy transferred more crystals than the entire previous group combined. At this time, a meeting was taking place in the Fang family's meeting room. It was finished, so the secretary bowed to the boss and announced the end. However, the man asked to tell the girl that abnormally high revenue was recorded today. Fang Chun jumped out of his seat when he heard that they were talking about the very dungeon that Tony went to. It was announced that one newcomer had single-handedly brought home $500,000 worth of magic crystals. The head of the Fang family was surprised that his successor was reacting so strangely to this name. The guys decided not to reveal their cards for now and pretended that nothing had happened. One of the masters noted that Tony was one of the capable newcomers Vanessa had recruited. The girl explained that he studied at the same school with her and she invited him to the training group. Fang Chun scolded Tony for separating from the team without permission and refusing to obey orders. However, the master stood up for his student, who was very diligent in his lessons. Fang Chun was annoyed that some pathetic master dared to contradict him. The secretary noted that the profit was within the normal range. This was a small exception, which denied the possibility of robbery. Thus, the head of the family realized that the guy was a gifted person, despite his low rank. In this case, the boss decided to instruct Vanessa to invite this young man to be part of the permanent assault group. Fang Chun was annoyed that his group could not complete such a simple task and kill the guy. The head of the family noticed that his successor was behaving strangely and drew the attention of the others to this. However, the guy stubbornly denied everything, although he hoped to take revenge on the master. A few days later, our hero was sitting in his classes at the university. The guy didn't understand why everyone around him, even the teachers, paid so much attention to him. This went on all day, even when he walked home with his girlfriend in the evening. Lucy was worried that her friend had been missing for some time, but he calmed her down. The girl even suggested that it was because the guy joined the Fang family. Tony denied everything, so Lucy decided not to put pressure on him and wait until he told her everything himself. The guys were walking along the street when they suddenly heard a scream from one of the alleys. They saw a whole crowd of adults beating up some guy. The young people immediately realized that they were simply mocking the unfortunate man. Lucy immediately decided not to pass by and stop the beating. The girl shouted that it was unfair for a whole crowd to attack one person. By this, she greatly angered the bandit who was about to hit the girl. However, he didn't have time to do this because Tony defended his girlfriend first. He ordered everyone to leave because only cowards would beat up the weak. The young people looked at the guy and immediately recognized him as that famous newcomer. They decided not to mess with the famous guy and just run away. Lucy immediately reached out to the victim and offered to take him to the hospital. However, suddenly the guy jumped up and said that he now has a bodyguard, so he is safe. He continued to shout after the fleeing offenders, while Lucy and Tony stood in silence. They realized the guy was fine, so they decided to just leave. When the unfortunate man finished screaming and turned around to thank the saviors, they were no longer there. The friends went for a walk further around the city, and after some time, they came across their new acquaintance. This was the same beaten guy who now organized Tony's fan club. The young man shouted about how Tony saved him and gave heat to the offenders. Guys passing by laughed at their classmate because Tony was too weak to become a fan. The others agreed with him, because the lowest ranks are the weakest among the awakened ones. Tony was also unhappy with this incident, so he rushed to the guy. He slammed his hands down onto the makeshift counter and broke it. The young man was frightened by the enormous power of his idol and retreated to the side. Tony couldn't believe that a stranger was trying to attract people to a group dedicated to him. The hero scolded the stranger because he was ruining his social life. However, the guy noticed that his heroism yesterday was capable of changing the world. Tony was unhappy and ordered the guy to get out, never to see him again. Rumors have already spread throughout the university that our hero has his own club. Even Lucy's classmates began to pester her with these stories while studying. In fact, the girl sincerely believed that this was not such a bad idea. After the awakened ones appeared, not all of them began to use their power for good, so it was dangerous. In the gateway, they have already begun to discuss the fact that a newcomer has appeared at the university and is assembling his own group. These were bandits who intended to rob a man dressed quite expensively. The man was scared and promised to pay the hooligans well if they let him go. However, one of the attackers replied that they were not going to steal his money. The second replied that they'd just like to listen to the rich people scream when they kill them. The awakened were about to harm a random passerby when someone appeared from above. A stranger in a black cloak jumped from the roof and lowered the guys' heads into the ground. She was a beautiful girl who immediately drew attention to the victim. The girl called herself a guardian, a king who protects ordinary people from hunters. It turned out to be Lucy, who threw her signature sign on the ground next to the victim. Tony lay on the bed and couldn't believe what had happened to him lately. Quite unexpectedly, the young man's phone rang, breaking the silence. It was a message from a guy in his group telling him to go to the dungeon again. The senior master of the Fang Family Training Center was heading towards his car. The man felt that there was someone behind him, but did not have time to react to it. It turned out to be Fang Dong with a knife in his hand, who came to take revenge for the confrontation at the meeting. The guy easily killed the master and left his trademark next to his body. After some time, a reconnaissance team arrived at the scene, accompanied by the family. Laboratory technicians testified that they found a special card next to the victim's body. A few days later, our hero came to the Fan Family Evaluation Center again. He agreed to go with the guys into the dungeon again, although he refused for a long time at first. His companions were not happy to see him because they had lost their reward due to the failure of the mission. The team leader recommended that the hero go with the squad into the dungeon. Tony decided to test his abilities and went with them into the portal. A couple of moments later, all the guys came out of the portal in a completely different place. Immediately after appearing in this world, the system issued a task to destroy all the monsters in the dungeon. Not far from them, the ground began to shake and mounds appeared from under the sand. The squad leader ordered everyone to prepare for a quick meeting with the monsters. Several mages called upon their power and tried to attack the worms. Thanks to magic circles, they were able to bind them and make them freeze in place. Then the second part summoned a fire ointment and tried to burn the monsters. Tony was impressed that they were able to clear the dungeon by 20% in such a short period of time. The commander said that his squad would move on, and the supply team should collect more loot. Tony stood still and watched as the battle mages moved forward. After a couple of minutes, they made significant progress in clearing the dungeon. The supply team literally couldn't keep up with them to collect all the crystals. After some time, the battle team reached the monster from the rank. They used their standard set of spells, immobilizing and attacking the monster. Tony was impressed that the magicians were able to change the weather and summon lightning at will. A couple of moments later, a deafening bolt of lightning pierced the monster's body. Immediately after this, The boss was defeated, and the dungeon was officially considered cleared. Immediately after this, everyone began to discuss how they wanted to get home as quickly as possible and relax. However, Tony noticed that the dungeon was only 99% cleared. The guy looked down and saw one monster in the form of a huge turtle. He drew his sword and asked permission to kill this monster himself. The squad leader said that the turtle's defense was too strong even for this rank, and the magic crystals from it were worth practically nothing. The magicians noted that the monsters have high defense, but they do not attack at all. Tony didn't believe what they said about the turtle's durability, so he decided to test it himself. He was impressed that after just a couple of hits, his hands began to shake. The squad leader was pleased with the guy's behavior, but decided to allow himself to deal with the turtle. Our hero began to attack the monster again and again without causing any harm. After several hours, Tony still had not managed to inflict a single wound on this monster. The hero closed his eyes and tried to come up with a tool that could help him. Tony then decided to try channeling his energy in the form of a chainsaw and cutting the turtle apart. Tony remembered that he had already seen a similar technique with his master before. The guy concentrated hard and then delivered one perfect blow. Only at that moment did he notice that he was finally able to inflict at least some damage on the monster. Tony was incredibly happy that he finally managed to do this. So several long hours of endless and weak attempts passed. During all this time, the hero only managed to slightly deepen the scratch on the monster's skin. The young man began to get tired, so he decided to try to change tactics. He rained down his perfect blows on the monster's torso again and again. In total, during this time, our hero attacked the turtle about 99 times. Now the guy raised his sword above his head and was preparing to strike for the 100th time. This perfect blow turned out to be a shock and allowed our hero to knock off the monster's head. The monster's body disappeared, and the guy received as a reward from the system the ability to instantly restore his stamina level once a day. Also, thanks to his efforts, he was able to increase his sword skills by a whole level. After Tony received the title of judge from the system, his powers increased manifold. In 2 weeks, he managed to complete several level dungeons, after which he became even stronger. However, he was still quite weak for stronger dungeons, so he was looking for a new way to train. Dungeons without any rank periodically appeared in the world, which no one wanted to buy due to inconsistent income. Our hero was going to go to one of these dungeons today. Near the entrance, Michael called him over, with whom the hero began to communicate after that incident. The guy introduced him to his friend, whom Tony saw for the first time. It turned out to be Simon, who had recently completed many solo dungeons and become a star. The guy immediately began to scold our hero for being late and waiting for him. However, Tony noticed that he arrived here just in time, just as he was told. Michael whispered in his friend's ear that Simon was just very patient. He asked the guy to wait a little while he agreed to enter the dungeon. Immediately afterwards, Tony and Simon watched as Michael spoke to the guards. The guy showed them that he had received 2 passes to this dungeon. However, one of the guards was confused by the fact that one pass was weaker than the dungeon level. In this case, Michael tried to persuade his friend to let them through. The guards had known this guy for a long time and they benefited from their cooperation, so they took the plunge. After that, Michael waved his hand and called his friends to join him. After that, a small team went through the portal and found themselves in the dungeon. The reward for clearing this dungeon was initially unknown to the hero. However, the team immediately found themselves in a cave, which was surrounded by goblins. Tony immediately noticed that there were too many monsters, so there would be problems. Simon decided to attack first and release the fire ointment from his hands. Our hero was impressed that after one fiery explosion, the dungeon was immediately cleared by 30%. The core team was impressed by Simon's skills, which helped him out on more than one occasion. Our hero was also impressed by the skills of his new acquaintance. After that, the guys moved further through the dungeon and entered a new room. It was too dark in there, so Simon snapped his fingers and created a small lantern. Goblins of different sizes immediately began to run towards this light from all sides. Tony turned out to be the fastest and immediately attacked all the monsters, quickly dispatching them. The rest of the comrades rejoiced at the fact that today they had such an excellent defense. Simon was unhappy that Tony could break a building with his sharp attacks. It was immediately clear that the guys would be fierce competitors while Michael tried to measure them up. The guys walked further along the corridor when the attention of our hero was attracted by the cracks in the wall. Tony asked Simon to shine a light and look around the room, but he didn't want to waste his time. Michael immediately thought that getting these two to work together would be very difficult. Simon allowed Michael to go with Tony to investigate the crevice. The remaining people followed Simon because they considered him stronger. Suddenly, one huge goblin with a weapon in his hands attacked their squad. However, the guy managed to defeat him with literally one small touch. The guy had no intention of finishing off this monster, leaving it to the others. At this time, our hero Tony was inspecting the hole in the wall and was going to check it. He moved in his own direction, periodically killing monsters that got in his way. At the same time, Simon and the team moved towards the boss, killing goblins. After some time, the detachment under his command reached the enormous size of the gate. The guy didn't think for a long time, so he immediately blew up the doors to an unfamiliar room. A little later, the gray smoke cleared and then a small detachment was able to go inside. Simon looked around and noted that he was in a huge throne room. In front of them, on a pedestal, sat an equally huge knight in armor. Simon tried to attack the monster again with his fire, but something went wrong. The guy first encountered armor that was resistant to fire. In this case, Simon decided to simply increase the temperature of his flame. However, somehow the knight managed to repel this blow. In this case, Simon decided to try to suppress the monster with the number of his attacks. However, he still somehow managed to block each of them. Simon approached the monster a little more and decided to attack on his own. The guy tried to exert physical force on the knight and then shoot him right in the eyes. He successfully carried out his plan, causing the flames to penetrate right under the armor. Everything looked as if a real fire had occurred inside, which melted the knight's insides. After that, it seemed to everyone that the monster was defeated and began to disappear. His teammates were happy to see how much material the boss dropped. Just by this time, Michael and Tony had completed their exploration of the cave and went to the others. The team went to the next dungeon, and Simon left these two guys to pick up the scraps. Michael did not understand why Simon left the monster's huge two-handed sword. The hero's system said that the dungeon was 100% cleared, so Tony decided to check just in case. Suddenly, the monster's sword began to glow green and something appeared from it. The system reported that the stripping progress rapidly began to roll back, decreasing in percentage. The huge sword was completely engulfed in green flames, which gradually formed into a figure. After a couple of moments, the light went out and a huge goblin appeared in its place. Tony ordered Michael to step back and took over the main battle. The goblin did not wait for our heroes to be ready, so he immediately attacked them. Michael barely dodged at the last moment, so he rushed away from the battlefield. But Tony was glad that he would be able to train on a strong opponent. The guy immediately found the monster's weak points and rushed straight to his head. With one precise strike, Tony drove his blade straight into the goblin's throat. After that, he used his blade wind release technique. From a fairly close distance, the monster's head was literally blown off. Tony carefully jumped to the ground, and the dead goblin fell like a stone. However, the hero immediately realized that there was something wrong with this monster. He was proven right when a moment later the headless goblin tried to get up. The monster got to its feet and continued to attack the heroes as if nothing had happened. A couple of moments later, his head appeared in place again and the monster was reborn. Tony found out that this boss can be resurrected, but he has a fragile body and low movement speed. Our hero was easily able to hit the monster several times in a short time. After the 7th victory, the monster lit up and began to disappear. But this was not the end. Instead of completely disappearing, it only began to gather at one point. Immediately after this, a rank A goblin warrior boss appeared in the place of light. Michael and Tony were amazed that the boss had evolved and become stronger. Before this, they had never had to fight such a strong opponent. The monster was so strong that with one light blow it was able to cut through a wall. His movement speed and maneuverability have also increased significantly. Tony had to work hard to dodge his lightning attacks. The goblin was capable of creating 3 cutting blades at once, which further complicated the situation. At first, Tony only ran away from the monster's attacks, not knowing how to fight it. At some point, our hero lost his vigilance and ran his back into the wall. Boss Goblin was going to take advantage of this situation and attack the guy. However, the monster was suddenly distracted by some strange sounds behind him. It was Michael who was about to use his hidden power. He promised to detain the monster, and during this time, Tony must come up with a plan for victory. Michael's technique was completed, so his body was surrounded by a special aura. The guy began to run around and scream, attracting the monster's attention. Tony was amazed that his friend could use such high-level provocation techniques. The goblin literally went crazy chasing the guy, although Tony had killed him several times before. However, the guy decided not to waste time and activated his new judge skill. His perception of an adult is so much that the hero was able to see movement even with his eyes closed. Immediately after this, Tony rushed to attack the monster and tried to attack him from behind. However, the goblin was not so simple, stopping the man's attack with ease. Tony ordered his acquaintance to stop using the provocation technique and hide. Michael trusted his friend and hoped that he had some kind of plan. Now Tony's perception was much higher, so he could follow the trajectory of the monster's sword. The guy noticed that the goblin was going to use some special technique. Thanks to his perception, he hoped that he would have time to calculate its movement. The goblin warrior used the 5 light cut chain technique. Thanks to his abilities, Tony was able to copy the technique in a second and repeat it perfectly. Thus, each of the opponents used the same technique against each other. However, our hero's sword skill was much higher than that of the monster. That is why he was able to defeat the boss, receiving a special ability as a reward. On the way to the dungeon, Simon felt unsatisfied and immediately led the team to another abandoned dungeon. This time, the guys found themselves in the Arctic permafrost region. They were walking across an endless frozen field when something appeared right above their heads. People looked up and saw a huge bird soaring above them. It turned out to be a rank A boss, the bird of snow and ice who ruled this dungeon. The team was happy that with his fire element, Simon could easily defeat the ice monster. The guy was confident of his victory, so he immediately attacked the boss. He destroyed the rock on which the monster was sitting, but he himself managed to dodge. The hunter was annoyed that this boss was very agile. He tried to win again with the number of his attacks, which helped him with the previous one. However, this boss was not as easy as it seemed at first glance. The bird flapped its huge wings and reflected the attacks downwards with currents of air. The fireballs immediately slammed into the ground and forced the hunters to maneuver between them. Simon was amazed that this bird had the dual attribute of ice and wind. Then he decided not to waste time on trifles and create a huge flow of fiery energy. At this time, the boss wasted no time and attacked people with huge blocks of ice. Simon formed a fireball and sent it straight towards the flying bird. About halfway between them, the fire element collided with the ice element. However, the bird turned out to be stronger and its long thorns fell to the ground directly on Simon's partners. It was the first time the guy had encountered such a strong opponent, so he began to worry a little. He ordered his partners to run away, and he himself promised to cover their back. However, the guys were unable to do this because a bird blocked their path. Simon ordered the people to disperse and attack the ice curtain with his fire. He cut a small hole in the ice and ordered people to escape through it. The partners were worried about their commander, but he asked not to underestimate him. Before the guy could finish speaking, new attacks from the ice bird immediately rained down on him from above. Simon managed to use his fire skills at the last moment or melt them down. Meanwhile, Michael and Tony were unaware of what was happening to the rest of the team. The guys came out of the dungeon and took out quite a lot of crystals. Michael wanted to give Tony most of it, but he decided to divide everything equally. Suddenly, the guys' attention was attracted by something strange to their left. They saw Simon and the rest of the team returning very battered. Michael asked his old friend what such a terrible thing happened to them. The others said that they encountered a monster with 2 attributes of ice and wind. Simon was unhappy that people continued to discuss his failure and escape. The guy asked why Michael and Tony spent so much time in the cave. Then the young man spoke about the 9 lives of a rank A boss and about defeating him. Tony laughed at the guy who didn't finish the job due to his patient nature. By this, he madly angered Simon, who already had a bad character. Immediately after this, Tony went home, hoping to work in such a dungeon again. Due to his hot temper, Simon could not refuse the opportunity to compete with the newcomer once again. The guy was worried that with his rash actions he had endangered his team, as his father had warned him. Previously, Tony received an ability that allowed him to restore physical strength once a day. In the general chat, there was an announcement that tomorrow a tournament would be held to find new members for the team. So the next day, Tony got ready and went to the Fan Clan Arena. There was a whole bunch of people there watching the ring in the middle of the stage. The host announced that today, some people will be able to get a chance to enter high-level dungeons. Of course, our hero could not help but take advantage of the opportunity and try his luck with his ability. The presenter announced that only 8 people out of 112 participants would be able to take advantage of this chance. The crowd simply roared at how exciting the competition was going to be. Tony wasn't entirely confident in himself because he didn't know the rest of the participants. Fang Chung was annoyed after seeing the two interact. Time passed, and the first competitive fights among the contenders were held in the arena. After each competition, only one of the fighters moved forward. The Awakened possessed various types of abilities, including elemental ones. The next test subject was Tony, who spoke on behalf of young Mistress Vanessa. An opponent was now speaking against him on behalf of teacher Fan Dong. One of them is a high-quality newcomer of the weakest rank, and the second took 9th place last year. This year, the guy hoped to get his coveted place, so he immediately rushed to attack our hero with his strongest technique. However, literally moments later, he was completely disarmed by one single blow from Tony. His physical strength was so great that the guy flew to the opposite end of the ring. At the same time, Tony did not use any special techniques, but only used his own strength. The head of the Fan family was impressed by how promising Vanessa chose the guy. But Fang Chun was even more annoyed that the girl was able to attract the boss's attention. Round number 2 ended with the same outcome and an easy victory for our hero. By the 3rd round, everyone began to fear their opponent and could not fight properly. Thus, the same 8 candidates were identified. They all lined up in a row, and the leader invited the crowd to greet them. Tony didn't expect his former teammates to be one of them either. His former raid partner was also impressed by the skills of the newcomer, whom he had previously underestimated. As a reward, the head of the family will personally present a special prize to the strongest of these 8. After this, a short break was announced, during which Fang Chong conferred with his subordinates. The doe was afraid to act dishonestly, because the enemy was very strong and everything happened in front of the spectators. However, Fang Chong noticed that he had already applied a weakening poison to the handle of the hero's favorite weapon. One of the subordinates noted that resorting to such methods was too obvious. However, the boss noticed that no one would know anything, because he had his own people everywhere. Then the subordinate stopped arguing with him and decided to act according to the plan. After the break, all players were invited to the stage and had the right to choose any weapon. Tony walked over to the table and carefully examined each of the blades. They were all too crooked and asymmetrical for him, so the guy decided to use his own powers. Vanessa explained that the hero suffers from obsessive-compulsive disorder, which is why he sometimes behaves strangely. Fang Chun was worried that the hero did not choose the poisoned sword, and the first point of the plan failed. However, he was calm because they had a backup plan just in case. One of his subordinates possessed a special high-level dagger that was capable of absorbing an opponent's stamina. The guy had stealth skills, so he could easily strike at close range. The boss was glad that even though Tony avoided the first step, he would still lose. The contestants made their choices in the first round, and Tony had to fight against the doe. The girl was upset when she saw that her opponent was using his own sword. The referee was about to announce that the fight was starting, but he didn't have time to do so. The girl raised her thin hand up and said that she was giving up without a fight. She explained that she was already in the top 8, and she was not interested in fighting anymore. Tony was surprised by the girl's behavior because he didn't think she would give up. The crowd was unhappy that they would see one less battle. Fang Chun was unhappy with the girl because he realized that she did it out of fear. The rest of the fights went off without any problems, quickly revealing their winner. Thus, our hero and Fang Chun's strong subordinate reached the finals. The crowd roared with excitement for such a good match, which they had been waiting for a long time. Even the head of the Fan family was intrigued by this rivalry and eagerly awaited the outcome. Vanessa was completely confident in her protege's victory, so she wasn't worried. Fang Chong was also not worried, hoping that his excellent plan would work. The host counted down and waved, signaling the start of the battle. Lee and Tony immediately jumped out of their seats and rushed to attack each other. Surprisingly, the hero turned out to be quite a strong opponent for an experienced hunter. The guy decided to use cunning and attack not only with his sword, but also with his body. Tony swung his leg and pushed his opponent to the side with force. Before he could get to his feet, our hero was already right in front of him again. The guy used the 3 light blades technique, which he spied on one of the bosses in the dungeon. However, his opponent suddenly disappeared and seemed to disappear into thin air. Vanessa was surprised because she didn't know about this guy's invisibility abilities. Tony stood in the middle of the arena and tried to feel from which side he would be attacked. Only thanks to his strong perception, the guy managed to substitute a weapon and defend himself. Even Lee was amazed at how insightful his opponent turned out to be. If Tony had not blocked his attack with his sword, his stomach would have already been ripped open. The guy even thought that our hero was able to see him through the disguise. In this case, he decided to take the opportunity and test his guess. At first, Tony didn't notice anything, but in moments of danger, he was acutely aware of the enemy. Thanks to this guy, he managed to dodge the enemy's attack. Lee realized that Tony felt threatened by him during the attack. However, he decided to add a little speed to confuse his opponent. In this case, Tony found himself under attack from an invisible opponent who attacked him from all sides. However, the guy had high sensitivity, so he successfully repelled attacks. Fang Chung was happy that his plan was working perfectly. Tony repelled the main attacks of his opponent, but he still managed to wound him. With each new wound, it became more and more difficult for the guy to keep up with the attacks. At some point, he lost his vigilance and managed to plunge the dagger straight into Tony's chest. Topa was dismayed that this would be the first time a murder had occurred in this arena. Lee was very happy about his imminent victory. He especially liked killing people. However, Tony was suspiciously calm and grabbed his opponent by his jersey. He easily got to his feet and punched the guy in the face with all his might. After one strong blow, the opponent lost consciousness and was defeated. Tony used the skill and immediately restored some of his health. The artifact dissipated, after which its abilities were used by our hero. The critical wound in his chest healed instantly, as if it had never existed at all. The host announced the end of the battle and that our hero had saved his healing ability for an emergency. The man carefully examined the opponents and announced that he was ready to name the winner. It turned out to be Tony, who was still completely new to the world of hunters. The crowd immediately roared loudly and began to congratulate their new winner. Head fan stood up from his seat and personally praised our hero with victory. Suddenly, the man's attention was attracted by a dagger that was in the arena at that time. The man immediately learned that this was a special dagger that reduced the enemy's stamina. Therefore, the head of the family immediately guessed that simple healing would not help our hero. The man admitted that Tony managed to defeat a rank B hunter with an A rank weapon. The head decided to keep his thoughts to himself, and he himself went to the arena and wanted to congratulate the winner. The man offered Tony to take the cool sword as a reward for his victory. The assistants brought out a special sword, which was considered very rare and powerful in their world. However, Tony greatly surprised the crowd when he refused this sword. Vanessa asked the guy to show respect and accept the gift, but he refused. Fang Chun was angry because of such disrespect for the master, but he stopped him. The head decided to be honest and asked what the guy really wanted as a reward. Tony wanted to completely forego any gratitude for the victory. However, he did not have time to finish. His whole body was struck by terrible pain. At that same second, the guy lost consciousness and fell to the ground right in front of the people. He regained consciousness and realized that he was in a completely different place. Tony woke up, looked around, and realized that he was in the hospital. A minute later, a nurse came into his room to check on his condition. The girl said that the reason the guy lost consciousness was extreme fatigue. She congratulated our hero on waking up and wanted to call the others. Tony knew that he had been knocked unconscious for 24 hours due to a side effect of using the skill and recovering. After some time, the head of the fan family came into our hero's room. He asked the guy about his well-being and wished him a speedy recovery. The man noticed that the guy had an incredibly resilient body, since he could withstand being wounded by such a dagger. The man announced that he had a good feeling about the guy and wanted to recruit him. He promised that he would definitely give our hero anything as a reward. The head announced that he had a lot to do, so they were about to leave. The man noticed that the heir Fang Chun was not going to leave the chamber. The head noticed that the bloodthirsty dagger was in the hands of his charges, so they needed to talk. Chun did not dare to confront his boss, so he stood up and wanted to leave. Tony just laughed at the fact that this guy was acting this way. The receiver did not understand why the head of the family was so unhappy, because he had been helping them for many years. The family did not have a son, which is why the boss once installed him. The guy thought that sooner or later he would become the head of the family and marry Vanessa. However, everything has changed dramatically since Tony appeared in his life. The situation had changed, so he urgently needed to contact his family. That evening, Fang Chong sat on the balcony of his family villa and drank. The interlocutor was hiding from prying eyes, but Chun asked not to do this. The man agreed and asked how soon he planned to become the head of the fan family. The guy explained that some problems had arisen and the current head suspected him. The senior master began to strengthen his position and plans to transfer all matters to his daughter. In order to kill the head, Fang Chun needed the help of his family. It was very dangerous to do this directly, so he needed a backup plan. He wanted Vanessa to be kidnapped and then sent a ransom message. Due to the fact that there are too many ownerless underground cities, the head will be forced to send all his people in search of his daughter. This way, they could take the chance to separate the old man from his strongest warriors. And after that, they will be able to lure the head into a trap and kill him with ease. Vanessa will be their insurance if the head really turns out to be invincible and manages to escape. Even if the old man decided to choose another heir, he would be left with no options and would be forced to hand over everything to Fang Chong. The man wanted to start implementing the plan immediately, but Chun asked him not to rush. He already had someone on whom to place all the blame. He just had to wait for the right moment. At one of the meetings, the head noticed that their financial reports had been stolen by a feuding family. No one could say anything, but the CFO noticed that it was a mistake. The girl knew that for several months they had been having problems with the Qing family, so she suspected the presence of a spy. The head agreed with the girl's assumption that there was a spy in their lair. Fang Chun suggested finding the stolen dungeon and identifying the traitor within the time limit. The head agreed and said that all the leaks started happening about half a month ago. The director noted that in this case, it is necessary to find out who came to the family half a month ago. The head remembered that around the same time, Vanessa brought newcomer Tony. However, the girl noticed that such a weak guy did not have access to documents. The director asked the girl not to defend her friend, which embarrassed her. The head decided not to allow quarrels in the council, so he promised to sort everything out. He asked for information about all the newcomers who came to them over the past 2 months. After the meeting ended, Vanessa felt depressed and upset. Fang Chun suggested that the girl wait first for the results of the investigation. However, Vanessa did not like how familiarly he behaved with her. Chun noticed that Tony is surrounded by girls all the time and his OCD is probably a lie. However, Vanessa knew very well that Lucy was just an old friend of her ward. Fang Chun did not let up and noted that the girl goes to this guy's house too often. Vanessa knew what the guy was doing with his subordinate hunters and advised him to stop judging everyone by himself. After that, Vanessa smiled and went about her business, leaving the guy alone. However, she still decided to discuss this problem with Tony and went straight to his house. Vanessa was a little embarrassed to barge into his personal space, so the girl took a bodyguard with her. Vanessa still didn't dare to knock on the door, so she just stood in front of it. The girl did not understand why she was so hesitant, because she came on a work issue. Suddenly, a very loud and suspicious sound was heard from behind the door. Vanessa was curious, so she put her ear to the door and listened. The sound sounded suspiciously like what couples usually do in private. At the same time, Vanessa heard the voices of not only Tony, but also Lucy. At some point, the girl even suggested that Fang Chong told her the truth. She was very embarrassed, so she started loudly banging on the door and demanding to be let in. Literally a second later, the door opened and a sweaty, beautiful girl appeared on the threshold. They both looked at each other and immediately recognized each other because they had seen each other at school before. Tony came out from the back of the room, wearing only his sweatpants. Vanessa and the bodyguard were taken by surprise to find the guys in such an environment. Lucy stepped aside a little and invited the girl and the man to go inside the apartment. Vanessa was about to cross the threshold and go in, but our hero stopped her. The guy said that they had just washed all the floors and they had to walk around without shoes. Vanessa was amazed at his cleanliness, but decided to follow the orders of the owner of the house. Tony noticed that there weren't even stools in his apartment, so everyone would have to speak while standing. The bodyguard was furious and wanted our hero to let the mistress sit on his bed. However, due to his illness, Tony was adamant that he would not allow anyone to sit on his bed. Vanessa knew very well about this ability of his, so she agreed to stand for a while. The girl told about the presence of a traitor in the Fan family, so all newcomers will be interrogated. Lucy was unhappy that she only just now found out about her friend joining the Fan family. Tony immediately said that he just didn't want to worry his dear friend. The guy never really wanted to join the Fan family, so he would be glad to have the opportunity to avoid them. Vanessa noticed that he was her subordinate, so he couldn't just leave, which angered Lucy. The girls grabbed the guy by both his hands and began to share them between themselves. In the end, Vanessa couldn't stand it anymore, got angry and left his apartment. She was very annoyed by Lucy, who was completely in favor of Tony leaving the camp. Suddenly, the bodyguard noticed that there had been no people on the street or around them for a long time. The guy immediately realized that something bad was happening, so he remained on guard. The bodyguard took off his work suit and found himself in sportswear. However, before he could say a word, some invisible force suddenly began to influence him. Because of this, the young man was instantly slammed into the asphalt with such force that cracks formed in it. For some time, the guy was still conscious, but could not move anything. Vanessa was worried about her bodyguard and immediately rushed to his aid. However, some invisible voice ordered the girl not to approach the guy so as not to be exposed to force. Vanessa turned towards the voice, and gas was immediately sprayed into her eyes from a can. Immediately after this, the girl lost consciousness and fell straight into the hands of the kidnapper. The task was completed. One of the kidnappers ordered the others to take the girl to an ownerless dungeon. The head of the Fan family sat calmly in his office and worked on the computer. Suddenly, his computer screen went streaky and showed a playback error. A second later, a pre-recorded video appeared instead of the usual screen. The masked man was in the cave and was pointing at the people behind him. They demanded a ransom of 30,000 for the return of the leader's beloved daughter. They demanded that the money be given to them in an amicable manner. Otherwise, they threatened to harm the girl herself. The head got so angry that he punched the computer screen. He could not believe that there were suicides in the world who dared to kidnap his daughter. However, the video recording he saw with the demands of the kidnappers was broadcast on all screens of the building at that time. Information about Vanessa's abduction spread instantly among all employees. That is why, after some time, the best hunters of the family were convened in the training hall. They all came in their combat uniform and were now greeting each other. The guys calmed down only when they saw that the head of the family was approaching them. The man announced once again that his beloved daughter Vanessa had been kidnapped. Therefore, he ordered everyone to voluntarily make every effort to catch the criminals and save Vanessa. The man knew that the older doe had the ability to relate the image to the real shooting location. However, the girl admitted that she had already tried, but it didn't work out. This meant that the girl and the kidnappers were in another world, which angered our leader. The man was horrified just by the thought that his beloved daughter was in the dungeon. However, the elder doe could not determine exactly who owned this very dungeon. In this case, Fang Chun suggested using a massive offensive technique. Send as many people as possible to a total search of every ownerless dungeon. This was the only possible option, so the head decided to do as he was advised. Immediately after this, the company went to the hospital room to see Vanessa's bodyguard. The guy apologized to his boss for failing to protect his daughter. The head asked the guy to tell him everything he remembered about the kidnapping that could help them. He said that everything happened suddenly after Tony left the house. The head ordered the secretary to check the hunters' bases and find people with suitable abilities. Fang Chun noticed that the kidnapping occurred immediately after Tony's visit. The bodyguard explained that Vanessa wanted to personally explain to the guy about the start of an investigation to find the traitor. Fan considered this suspicious and began to convince the head that the guy was involved in this. That evening, Lucy sat on the swing and watched the children run along the road. She was upset that Tony ran out of the house after some call and didn't tell her anything at all. Suddenly, two adult guys approached the girl, looking for Tony. She didn't know anything, but the bodyguards found it very suspicious. The guys asked the girl to go with them to help them. At this time, Vanessa was sitting surrounded by her captors in the dungeon. The guys were talking among themselves about how they were waiting for the head of the Fan family to arrive. Vanessa found it suspicious that her father was the target of the kidnappers. The girl could not do anything, so she decided to collect as much information as possible for now. In fact, she understood that she was underground in an ice cave. This was the same abandoned permafrost dungeon in which Simon had recently lost. So this time, Simon called Michael for help, and he brought Tony with him. The guy himself didn't know where he was called, so he wasn't happy about the meeting either. Simon was determined to prove his superiority by clearing this dungeon. The guys moved through the icy forest until they came across several monsters. They turned out to be huge snow and polar bears that were very aggressive. Simon knew they were no match for him, so he was relatively calm. The guy easily defeated the monsters, causing a huge explosion in the middle of the forest. These loud sounds drew the attention of Vanessa's kidnappers, who were hiding in a cave. One of the guys decided that he would go out for a while and check the situation outside. Meanwhile, Simon burned another polar bear in the middle of a snowy forest. However, he was not very happy because there was a boss battle ahead of them. Tony wanted to check for the presence of other monsters, but Simon assured that he had killed everyone here. Michael asked to describe the boss so they could come up with a plan of action. Simon remembered that it was an ice bird that had great speed and 2 types of elements. Michael listened carefully to his friend's story and then came up with the perfect plan. He noticed that Tony has the element of wind and uses a wind sword. Michael noted that the wind can start a fire, so the guys need to work together. Tony appreciated that his friend could improvise so well in difficult situations. However, they didn't get to chat for long because the dungeon boss was approaching. It really was a huge ice bird that hunted strangers. Tony and Simon prepared to attack this huge monster at the same time. First, Simon launched a small amount of fire stream at the monster. However, the bird easily repelled this attack with its elements of ice and wind. Then the next time our Tony and Simon decided to act together. This time, the bird failed to extinguish their powerful flame and received damage. Because of this, the monster was extremely annoyed and decided to attack people quickly. The bird formed huge blocks of ice and directed them directly towards our friends. Then the guys decided not to hold back and use their abilities to their full potential. Tony tried to summon the most powerful wind technology that was within his control. The guys put their efforts together and at the same time created huge fire whirlwinds. He not only melted the ice blocks, but also absorbed the iceberg inside him. There was a huge explosion in the sky, which one of the kidnappers saw. The guy realized that these people did not come because of Vanessa. They were simply protecting the dungeon. The guys were very happy when they were able to defeat the boss and were already heading towards the exit. Suddenly, Tony's attention was drawn to something strange not far from them. The guy saw human footprints in the snow and asked if people lived in this cave. At this time, one of the kidnappers returned back to the cave and began to answer the questions of his partners. He explained that the hunters were simply clearing out the dungeon and should have left by now. Vanessa was upset that it was not her beloved father. Meanwhile, outside, Simon paid attention to the words Tony said to him. The guy pointed to human footprints that went deep into the forest. Michael noticed that these were definitely male footprints, a large size 44. They were especially interested at that moment in where exactly these tracks were heading. The guys thought that they had let humanoid monsters into the dungeon, so they decided to follow the tracks and find out who they belonged to. Meanwhile, Vanessa's bodyguards brought Lucy to the very head of the Fan family. The man knew that this was the girlfriend of Tony's hero, so he tried to interrogate her. However, the girl honestly said that she had no idea where her friend had gone. The bodyguards did not understand why the girl continued to openly lie and hide this information. Lucy tried to convince those gathered of her honesty and Tony's innocence. However, Dylan was unhappy with this and believed that the girl was an accomplice. However, their conversation was suddenly interrupted by Fang Chun, who burst into the office with news. He announced that while watching the video, intelligence agents found one clue. In the video, melted snow was visible in some places, and steam flew out of the mouth during the conversation. The head immediately ordered his secretary to check the cold dungeons that were nearby. However, Fang Chung said that among the abandoned dungeons, there is only one suitable one. Then the head ordered to tell all search groups that they should go to this particular place. The head himself put on his jacket and went ahead of them in search of his daughter. Fang Chun ran after him, and Lucy remained standing in the middle of the room. At the last moment, the head ordered the bodyguards to keep an eye on the girl and not let her go anywhere. At this time, a company of our heroes was watching the entrance to the ice cave. The guys wanted to explore it, but Michael was too careful. He believed that people in the dungeon might behave inappropriately, so it was better to observe them first. However, Simon and Tony were too confident in their abilities and did not wait for anyone. Michael was disappointed by the behavior of his friends, but he could not do anything. After that, the whole trio got up and headed deeper into the ice cave. Tony walked ahead of everyone and examined the cave carefully so as not to miss anyone. One of the kidnappers suddenly heard someone's voice in the cave and became alert. The guys hoped that it was the head of the Fan family who came to save his daughter. The kidnappers used their invisibility skills and disappeared from view. Simon tried to shout very loudly and call someone in the cave. The guys heard a rather loud mooing next to them, so they hurried to this place. All this time, they walked and were guided only by these strange sounds. Tony and Simon were surprised when they saw a tied-up girl in front of them. We weren't even more surprised when we realized it was Vanessa. Tony didn't understand how his friend ended up in this place, because they had only recently seen each other in the city. All this time, the company was watched by the kidnappers, who were hiding in the shadows above. The guys rushed straight to the girl to help her free herself. However, Vanessa began to sharply shake her head from side to side, not letting them near. Tony understood the girl's hint and stopped abruptly, almost falling into a trap. The guys immediately realized that they were not alone in the cave. Someone invisible constantly continued to attack them, forcing the guys to dodge. Thanks to his perception, Tony could anticipate his opponent's attacks and block them. Tony decided to combine his strength with his friends and free the girl. Simon immediately attacked where his new acquaintance pointed him. The kidnappers realized that with such abilities of the guys, there was no longer any point in hiding. Immediately after that, they canceled their invisibility skill and showed up. Tony was able to sense several of his captors, which helped him escape death. Michael realized that they were involved in something serious if they were confronted by guys like this. The killers began to attack our guys, but they were not so simple. One of the kidnappers blocked our hero when the second attacked him from behind. However, they were prevented from striking by Simon, who knocked the kidnapper down. Immediately after this, he attacked the enemy with his most powerful fire. Then Simon saw that our hero Tony was already fighting with the second guy. He decided to help his partner and attacked another kidnapper with his fire. This distracted the enemy, allowing our hero Tony to attack him himself. The kidnappers started to run away, and Simon was going to pursue them. However, at the last moment, Tony suddenly grabbed him by the shoulder and stopped him. At that same second, another trap appeared right in front of them, into which Simon almost fell. The kidnappers even complimented our guys on how capable they were as dungeon crawlers. Simon realized that without Tony's help, he could have been dead several times over. Seeing such a strong enemy, the kidnappers decided to make money on this as well. They intended to defeat the guys and use them in their terrible game. Tony realized that they were in serious trouble and they needed to stick together. Therefore, the guys joined forces and rushed to fight the kidnappers. At the same time, the head of the Fang family, Dylan and Fang Chun, entered the dungeon. By this moment, several strong heroes had already rushed towards him. However, the guys did not have time to wait for the others, so they decided to go first. The head of the Fan family and the traitor Chun entered the desired portal ahead of everyone else. However, everything could not go so easily. It ruined all the plans of the heir. Fang Chun crushed the blocking crystal and took advantage of its abilities. Because of this, the remaining heroes were unable to get inside the portal and into the dungeon. They immediately realized that it was a trap, and the entrance was now sealed to them. The head of the Fan family discovered human footprints in the middle of the snowy desert. He wondered why everyone else hadn't crossed the portal yet. However, he decided that the guys would figure it out on their own without him and went ahead of everyone else. For some time, the head of the Fan family, Dylan and Chun, stood in front of the entrance to the cave. It was here that the tracks that the guys stumbled upon in the forest led them. Fang Chun tried to stop his boss and wait for everyone else. However, the man noticed that he did not want to save his daughter, but to kill the kidnappers. Fang Chun was very surprised there that the man was not worried about the safety of his girl. Meanwhile, in the cave, our hero Tony fought with the real kidnappers. Simon fiercely covered his back and tried to take part of the blow himself. Michael was about to run for help, but something stopped him. The kidnappers immediately realized that the head of the family, Fan Dylan, had come to the cave. They immediately stopped the fight and tried to escape from the crime scene. The guys used their invisibility skill and disappeared from people's sight. At that very second, the head of the Fang family made a passage in the cave with his bare fists. He saw Tony and Simon holding guns and Vanessa sitting tied up. The man was very surprised to see this company inside the cave. Fang Chun immediately started screaming that it was Tony who kidnapped the girl. Our hero did not understand at all what kind of nonsense he was talking about, so he objected. The head of the Fan family promised his daughter to save her, but the girl began to resist. Simon tried to explain that he accidentally ended up in the cave while chasing other people. However, the girl's father did not listen to him because he was from a feuding family. The man was very angry, so he immediately used his body-strengthening technique. He immediately rushed into battle at Simon and Tony, whom he mistook for the kidnappers. The guys barely managed to come back at the last moment from his powerful blow. They jumped back in the other direction and tried to convince the man again. Simon knew he couldn't be easily reasoned with, so he decided to stop him first. The guy attacked the head of the Fan family with a fireball, but he repelled it. Immediately after this, the man dealt such a strong blow to our hero that his sword broke into several pieces. Tony flew to the opposite end of the cave and crashed into a solid wall. The head of the family, Fan Dylan, did not hesitate for long and immediately began to attack further. Tony and Simon managed to combine their techniques and create a fiery whirlwind. Vanessa was worried that her father might suffer greatly in this battle. Simon apologized to the head of the family because they had to counterattack him. However, this attack had no effect on the man. He easily got out of them. The head of the Fan family grabbed the heroes by the throat and threw them both to the cold ground. The man squeezed Tony's neck forcefully, causing him to spit out some of his blood. The man was too strong for our hero, and now he was about to deliver the decisive blow. However, Vanessa's father suddenly became ill and had another attack. The girl was worried that her father's health had been undermined by illness. Fan observed the situation and was happy at how well everything turned out. Tony worried that the two of them had done too much damage to the man. However, at this moment, the head of the family remembered that Fang Chong had come with him. He turned around and noticed that one of his heirs was ready to attack his enemies. In the next second, Fang Chong pierced the body of the head of the Fang family instead of the kidnappers. No one expected such a betrayal, so even the head of the family did not have time to do anything. He was seriously injured when he fell to the ground and was bleeding. The man suggested that Fang Chun was behind the kidnapping of Vanessa along with two guys. However, the guys said that they were not together and immediately began to attack further. The head of the Fang family gathered all his strength and rushed to attack the enemy again. He intended to protect his only daughter no matter what. Fang Chung was amazed that even wounded, the head of the Fang family was incredibly strong. However, at that moment, a huge force pulled the master to the ground and destroyed the floor beneath him. These were the same 3 kidnappers who had been pretending to be invisible all this time. Only now did the head of the Fan family realize who the real traitor was here. It took several more uses of gravity to force the man to bow his head. The man was shocked that his possible successor had betrayed him. Fang Chun was about to kill Vanessa's father, so the girl closed her eyes in fear. However, a huge fire whirlwind prevented him from doing this. It was Tony and Simon who again joined forces and attacked their opponents. The kidnappers took over the bloody battle with these young guys, and the would-be heir was ordered to kill the head of the Fan family. The killers actively attacked our heroes and did not allow them to help Vanessa's father. At this time, he single-handedly confronted his subordinate, who turned out to be a traitor. Fang Chung decided to take the opportunity to attack his former boss. However, at that moment, Michael appeared on the battlefield, about whom everyone had completely forgotten. The guy used his ability and made the bodies of the kidnappers be attracted to him like a magnet. Fang Chun's attacks also flew towards Michael, which surprised the guy. About halfway through the journey, the killers came under fire from an attack by their employer and an explosion occurred. Michael barely managed to jump to the side to avoid getting caught in the explosion himself. Unfortunately, the guy could not repeat this technique often because he used up too much energy. Now that the kidnappers were out of the way of the heroes, they attacked the air. The guys combined their forces again and sent a fiery whirlwind towards Fang Chung. The guy tried to protect himself with his own technology. She let him pass through the firestorm and headed towards the heroes. The guys barely had time to jump in different directions before the fiery ray hit them. The blow was so powerful that the cave began to shake. Suddenly, one of the large appendages on the ceiling of the cave broke off and began to fall down. The head of the Fan family noticed that he was rushing straight towards his beloved daughter. The man gathered his strength and was able to keep the stone from falling on the girl. The head of the Fan family threw the cobblestone aside and straightened up. He apologized to his daughter because his body ended up being too ordinary. Immediately after this, the man fell, and Simon untied his daughter. Michael and Vanessa decided to take care of the head of the Fan family while he was unconscious. Vanessa asked why her old acquaintance and friend betrayed their family. Fang Chung noted that the public would only know that the family was attacked by robbers. The guy sincerely believed that his participation in this attack would remain unknown to anyone. It was for this that he needed to kill everyone present. Fang Chun created a beam of enormous power and sent it straight towards Vanessa. However, Michael was able to use the remnants of his strength and change the trajectory of the attack. Now, instead of the girl, the beam was directed directly towards the guy. At the last moment, Tony managed to protect his friend and throw him to the ground. At this time, Simon immediately attacked Fang Chung with a fire attack. However, he managed to dodge because he was a little faster. The guy noticed that even if the hero manages to avoid the attack, they will be crushed by the cave. Simon was surprised that Fang Chung was willing to bury himself with them. However, the heir noticed that he had already called for help and would soon become a hero. Tony didn't want to die in that cave at all, so he asked Michael to come up with a plan. The man noticed that even if they managed to get out of the cave, Vanessa and her father would not have time to do this. If the girl remains in the cave, they will definitely be recognized as traitors and will be persecuted. That's why Tony and Simon decided to defeat Fang Chun and get out unscathed. The heir was annoyed that they were not paying attention to him and were talking among themselves. By this time, Michael had come up with a plan and Tony began to implement it. The young man tried to approach the enemy and avoid his attacks. Tony attacked Fang Chung, while Michael helped him avoid the attacks. Hand-to-hand combat was not the traitor's strong suit, but he was still skilled. At this time, Tony stopped fighting and decided to follow Michael's plan. Instead of attacking, our hero grabbed his opponent's wrists tightly. After that, he signaled to his friend to begin the attack. Simon took his signal and began to concentrate his energy in one place. Fang Chun resisted as best he could and kicked our hero in the torso. He was horrified that Tony had decided to sacrifice himself to keep him. At that moment, Simon's attack struck both of them, knocking them down. However, Fang Chung was able to withstand the powerful attack from his fire and remained standing. The man was amused by the fact that some newcomer expected that he could die with him. However, Tony used his doll switching skills and ended up right behind his opponent. His plan was to use the substitution doll and attack his opponent constantly. The guys hoped to exhaust their opponent so much that he would stop resisting. It was for this reason that Simon attacked Fang Chung and Tony every time. The traitor knew that if the guys continued to aim directly at him, then his strength would not be enough for long. So he decided to counterattack them to give himself a small chance. The man gathered his remaining strength and began throwing balls of energy. However, because of all this, the guy did not notice how our hero was attacking him from behind. Tony took advantage of his enormous physical strength and literally carried the enemy to the exit of the cave. Because of this, the trajectory of his attack changed and he broke through the ceiling of the cave. From a distance, it looked like a signal fire for which reinforcements were waiting. One of the kidnappers pretended to be an assistant and told everyone else to go to the scene. At this time, the ceiling of the cave was destroyed. Everything around was in smoke. After some time, Fang Cheng was able to get out of the rubble and catch his breath. He looked around and saw the remains of the cave in which he had recently been. Fang Cheng hoped that he could now become a hero and inherit the company. However, it turned out that all of his opponents were still alive. Simon was impressed that Tony managed to shield him with his body, but he was still unharmed. The traitor was so angry that his plan had failed that he lost his temper. The man didn't understand why Tony couldn't just die and leave him alone. The young people began new battles after escaping from the cave. Fan decided to use the remnants of his strength and finally finish off his opponent. However, Tony was fast enough to avoid each of his attacks. He deftly dodged every beam of energy with which his opponent tried to kill him. It was at this time that Fang Chun paid attention to leaving Vanessa and her father unprotected. Then the guy decided to take the opportunity and kill them while they were weak. Tony immediately realized that he might not have time to save his friends. Fang Chun immediately prepared one of his most powerful attacks and sent it towards Vanessa. The girl and Michael immediately raised the fact that they would not be able to avoid defeat. Tony tried to speed up as much as possible and have time to protect his friends. However, a huge explosion still occurred, raising a cloud of dirty dust into the air. When the smoke cleared, it turned out that Tony still managed to protect his friends. However, the guy served as a human shield and was very seriously wounded. Fang Chun was not going to give the guy a moment of rest and was going to attack him again. Vanessa was very worried that Tony would not be able to withstand so many attacks in a row. However, before the girl had time to finish speaking, an explosion of energy hit our hero again. The wound in his body was so large that one could see right through it. Despite all his severe injuries, Tony still continued to stand on his feet. The last attack tore his chest and tore off his arms. Fang Chun laughed wildly because he felt his undeniable victory approaching. However, unexpectedly, our hero's body began to recover right before his eyes. Fang Chun hoped that he could surpass our hero's recovery skill. However, this time Vanessa decided to help her friend and rushed to him. The girl wanted to protect him just like the guy had been protecting her all this time. She was also a hunter and still had quite a lot of strength. She did not allow her to fight, but served as a good shield for the girl. Vanessa's father remembered that before his death, his wife gave their daughter protective armor. After that, he shouted to Tony not to protect the girl, but to fight the traitor. He realized that his opponents outnumbered him and began to get nervous. Before he could do anything, Tony had already taken off with lightning speed. Our hero rushed towards the enemy and intended to defeat him with his bare hands. Fang Chun easily stopped our hero's fist and avoided the blow. His body was of a very high rank, so the guy also had great strength. Fan was always proud that his body was like that of an S-rank hunter. However, even this did not help him withstand the enormous power of our hero. The traitor was amazed at how much power the newcomer possessed. At this time, the bodyguards of the Fan family came running to the battlefield and were going to protect the traitor. However, Vanessa noticed that the men had it all wrong. She said that it was the Fan who hired the kidnappers and threatened her family. Taking advantage of the general confusion, Fang Chong attempted to escape with his captors. The guys decided to use a special artifact and open a portal. This portal would allow them to be transported to any other location immediately. Tony tried to stop the traitor, but did not have time to do it. Literally a second passed before the entire trio disappeared from the battlefield without a trace. Tom remembered the item he got while fighting the turtle, which was supposed to help with the restoration. The guy didn't want the side effects of using the replacement doll to knock him out for 24 hours. At this time, their older sister, the doe, who was an excellent physician, joined them. Vanessa noticed that after the entire battle, she was safe and sound. Tony also drank his potion, so he felt great now. One of the guards approached the witch and asked her to activate the portal to move. The girl looked at the condition of the other fighters and decided to act immediately. She used the same portal through which the kidnappers left. This allowed the entire company to move directly to the hospital and provide first aid to the victims. Vanessa was worried about her father's condition, so she talked with doctors. She was told that the head of the family was in very serious condition and there was only one way to save him. However, the doctor refused to believe in traditional medicine and demanded that treatment be continued with the classical method. The hunter-magician was unpleasant that doctors were desecrating the methods of his ancestors. Meanwhile, the rest of the company asked to let them go home since they were not involved in the kidnapping. The witch believed them, but wanted the head of the family to decide what to do with them. Simon felt bad that they had saved so many people and were being treated disgustingly. Tony noticed Lucy among the visitors and asked how the girl ended up here. A friend said that she was grabbed by bodyguards while they were looking for Tony. The young man did not like that his girlfriend suffered because of the traitor. Suddenly, the squeak of the device, which confirmed the death of the head of the family, was heard throughout the ward. Vanessa was terrified that her father could die right in his hospital bed. Then Lucy came forward and asked permission to try one method. Tony was worried that he had failed to hide his girlfriend's powers from the others. Vanessa was desperate, so she was ready to agree to anything. Then Lucy came close to the patient and directed a stream of her energy towards him. After some time, the man's heartbeat recovered and he came to his senses. The man ordered the witch to be notified about the meeting the next day. After this, the head of the family remarked that he should thank Tony and his friends for saving him. The man asked everyone except Tony and Vanessa to leave the room in order to talk to them. The next day, in the Great Hall, the head of the Fan family decided to make a loud statement. He said that Fang Chong colluded with their enemies and was expelled from the family. Subordinates immediately began to make noise and express their opinions on this matter. One of the girls was unhappy with this decision and remembered her last conversation with the traitor. Then the man told her that he was forced to be with Vanessa because her father ordered so. However, in fact, he sincerely loved the redhead, as he admitted to her. That is why the girl was sure that Vanessa and Tony had set up her beloved. The head of the family announced that due to health reasons he could not continue to manage the company. So he officially hands over the headship to his daughter and Vanessa. All her subordinates supported this decision because they sincerely respected the girl. After this, the man announced that Tony would become Vanessa's first deputy. This statement has already raised many questions among his subordinates. Ranka Hunter Hinata stood up and said that she was against this appointment. Michael tried to say that Tony is an exceptionally gifted guy, so no one should mind. However, there were those who agreed with the girl that the guy was too weak to be a successor. Because of this, a whole crowd of indignation arose among the subordinates who agreed with the claim. Hinata said that the head of the Fan family always judged people based on their talents and merits. At that moment, Vanessa took the floor and came forward with a speech in front of everyone. She allowed doubters to personally test Tony's strength. Hinata was expecting this because a rather strong subordinate had to fight with the guy. The fighter jumped high up and was about to attack the hero with his signature technique. The next moment, Tony stood up to his unexpected opponent and began to fight. He delivered several super fast punches to his opponent's body. After that, with one blow he threw the guy several meters back. He powerfully crashed into a solid wall and fell to the cold ground unconscious. Vanessa noticed that Tony used exactly the same technique against the traitor. The girl loudly announced that anyone could challenge him. At this time, Hinata was annoyed that her friend had done his task so poorly. She announced that everyone would have to answer for harming her student. Tony was extremely disappointed that her student was so weak. Then the girl became furious and decided to attack him on her own. However, another of her subordinates asked the girl to stop and choose a better moment to attack. She didn't want to do this, but still decided to listen to her subordinate. After that, the girl picked up her student and dragged him away. One of Hinata's companions apologized and quietly released his small weapon. It was a flying drone that could eavesdrop on everything around it. After this incident, the meeting ended and there were no objections to the new positions. Tony was sitting calmly and relaxing when Mike and Vanessa came into his room. The girl thanked the guy for saving her and for supporting her. After that, our hero turned his attention to Michael, who continued to follow on his heels. In fact, the guy wanted to invite our hero to gather a team and explore an ownerless dungeon. The guys were surprised that they received this offer immediately after returning. Michael politely noted that now is the best time to cultivate your strength. Tony didn't understand what was going on at all, so I had to explain it to him. Vanessa took the pointer in her hand and said that she would try to tell him everything from the very beginning. Throughout the world, underground resources are limited. In their country, the underground is controlled by authorities. However, the Fan family is a non-governmental organization, so it has its pros and cons. Organizations like them can receive dungeon resources, but their distribution is completely controlled by the state. When, after some time, the resources of one dungeon are exhausted, then you need to move on to the next. Therefore, many non-governmental organizations are essentially in decline. That is why it is necessary to explore new abandoned dungeons that contain deposits of resources. Tony answered honestly that he wasn't particularly interested. With these words, he greatly surprised Vanessa and Michael, who were counting on him. Michael literally rushed to beg his friend to help him explore the entire dungeon. However, Tony asked his friend not to throw him a tantrum out of the blue. He looked at one of the maps and asked why the route on it was so chaotic. Michael replied that someone needed to create just such a route. Tony could not calmly look at this map because of his illness. In this case, Michael decided to invite his friend to create a new route that would be ideal. Tony was inspired by this idea and decided to start transforming the routes. He announced that he wanted to get to the western dungeons by the most direct route possible. Vanessa was glad that she quickly managed to persuade the guy to help. And at this time, the drone quietly flew towards the girl and hid among her hair. Thanks to this, the man learned that Tony was going to explore abandoned dungeons in the west. Therefore, the girl decided to take the help of Damon, who knew those places well. S-rank hunter Damon promised that he would make the guy pay for everything. A little later, Vanessa sat in her office and looked through work documents. The girl discovered a file with an investigation into the case of Fang Chong's betrayal. At this time, Vanessa's father, who was recovering from the incident, entered the office. Vanessa asked him to look at the documents their investigators had collected. It turned out that on almost all issues, the traitor contacted their enemies. Suddenly, the head of the Fang family sharply hit the girl on her tender and fragile neck. Vanessa didn't understand why her father behaved this way towards her. Then the man showed the girl a small drone, which he destroyed. This meant that someone had eavesdropped and learned information about Tony's plans. At this time, Hinata reported to Fang Chun about where our hero was going to go. She announced that she was going to introduce Damon into the guy's squad. The rest of the trio were to wait in ambush and attack the group at its weakest moment. Fang Chun had made a great plan, so now everyone had to play their roles. The man hoped that this time he would be able to defeat his opponent. After some time, Michael and Tony moved straight towards the western dungeon. The guys arrived at the first post on their way and saw a small portal. Michael had never been to this place, so he would have preferred to gather a larger group. Tony was upset that the guy was only thinking about this now. However, Michael noticed that they could find partners in the dungeon itself among the other hunters. It was at this moment that Damon appeared, who was already waiting for the guys here. He stood on top of the building that housed the portal to the dungeon. The man pushed off the roof and jumped to the ground right in front of our heroes. He introduced himself as a local free hunter and invited the guys to join him. Tony didn't know this man, so he was strongly against his participation. However, Damon noted that he had been working in these areas for a long time and knew the area well. However, our hero didn't like how dirty the traveler was. Hinata watched from ambush and did not understand why a group of people were taking so long. Michael noted that they really needed a partner who knew the area well. It was only because of this that the young man agreed to travel with Damon. In fact, the hunter didn't like the way Tony reacted to his appearance. After that, only the guys decided to meet and introduce themselves to each other. When the greeting and handshake were over, the entire trio entered the portal. Hinata ordered her partners to watch the exit and wait for travelers to appear. And at this time, the trio came out from the other side of the portal and found themselves in a dungeon. Michael was surprised when he saw that they were in a deserted dungeon. Suddenly, 3 desert enemies appeared right in front of our travelers. Damon volunteered to fight these monsters first and stepped forward. He pulled out his long sword from its sheath and promised that he would deal with the monsters. The guy really defeated all 3 opponents in the blink of an eye. Immediately after this, they crumbled into small particles and scattered through the air. Michael was extremely impressed by how strong their new partner was. Damon admitted that he was just warming up and didn't show his full strength. After the monsters disappeared, several artifacts appeared in their place. However, suddenly several more soldiers appeared right in front of Tony. Damon said that if the root of evil is not destroyed, they will continue to appear. This was the key mechanism of the sand dungeon that worked everywhere. In fact, he knew that the hidden boss was the tree behind them. Tony clarified whether the monster would indeed continue to update itself over and over again. Michael immediately understood exactly what his friend with OCD was getting at. Hours later, Tony continued to fight the monsters that endlessly appeared in front of them. Michael explained to him that fighting allows his friend to collect bonuses indefinitely. That's why Tony continued to fight all the monsters that appeared in front of him. Immediately after this, boxes with artifacts that our hero needed appeared from them. At this time, robbers who were already frozen were waiting for them outside. The guys did not understand why the team spent so much time in the dungeon. One of the guys went out in the middle of the night to replenish their supplies as the wait was lengthy. The night was ending and the sun would soon rise, but Tony was still fighting. He continued to hone his skills on endlessly respawning monsters. Damon had no idea how long the guy was going to do this. However, Michael noticed that his friend would not stop until he collected all the possible bonuses. The hunter had never encountered anything like this, because they already had a whole mountain of boxes. He knew that if the guy continued to fight, he would not have the opportunity to attack him. That's why Damon decided to take the whole situation into his own hands. He pulled out his sword and let out a loud scream, which attracted the boy's attention. First of all, the traitor decided to end the quest and then attack Tony. The swordsman knew that he needed to defeat the tree and destroy the lantern at its top. It was at this point that a hidden boss appeared to end the challenge. The tree began to constantly attack the man who dared to disturb him. It was at this moment that our hero Tony noticed that there was a hidden boss in the dungeon. Damon simply pretended that this was the first time he had heard about this and that he himself did not know. The tree quickly became active and was about to attack our heroes. In fact, huge and powerful roots were hidden under this sand. The last time Tony pooled his power with Simon, a thought occurred to him. In order to be prepared for anything in the dungeon, you need to have items of various elements with you. He sincerely hoped that he had not accidentally revealed his knowledge of this boss. At this time, Tony mercilessly chopped with his sword the roots of the tree that climbed out from under the sand. The guy took his favorite lighter and threw it straight towards the dry tree. The lighter fell straight into the monster's mouth and fell deep inside it. Immediately after this, the tree began to swell and reached incredible sizes, after which it burst and shattered into a million very small pieces. In place of the monster, a dusty curtain formed, hiding everything behind it. However, instead of being completely destroyed, the monster became even larger and stronger. During the fall, Damon injured his leg and thanked Tony for saving him. The guy was very happy to help the man because he considered them one team. Damon decided to repay the guy a favor for a favor since he saved him. The guys saw how the tree again increased in size and gained its power. Michael suggested that this boss has a mode for close and long-range attacks. However, Damon noticed that the tree had rather weak defense in close combat. He said that you just need to choose the right moment and finish him off. However, the man noticed that if they fail from the explosion, they will not have time to hide. Tony immediately understood what he meant and decided to give it his all. The guys waited for the moment when the tree attacked them and used this opportunity. They dodged the blow and tried to get closer to him. At that very moment, the tree released its powerful and huge roots from under the sand. Damon said he would grab the outer branches to distract the monster and cause an explosion. After that, he began to chop down various branches and roots of the tree at great speed. And at this time, Tony broke forward and began to attack the monster itself. Michael took advantage of his opportunity and began to lure tree branches. This allowed us to buy some time to promote our hero Tony. The tree continued to relentlessly attack its opponents with balls of energy. However, Tony miraculously managed to break through and get close to the tree. The guy forcefully thrust his sword into its trunk and decided to cut it into pieces. Tony struck the monster in various places with great speed. Immediately after the blow, the guy ran away a decent distance and joined his friends, because it was at that moment that the tree began to smoke and threatened to explode. The guys hoped that they were at a fairly large distance from the monster. At this moment, a huge explosion occurred, which created a shockwave. This time, the heroes managed to completely destroy the lantern, which was the heart of the monster. After this, the guys were thrown in different directions by the blast wave. After the smoke cleared, they saw the remains of the defeated monster in front of them. The system announced that the task was completed just perfectly. After this, the huge rotten body of the monster began to disappear and turn into dust. It dropped a reward that made it possible to create a zero-gravity area with a diameter of about 100 nanometers. Damon was immensely glad that their ordeal was over and offered to leave. After the guy paid off his debt, he could kill Tony again. However, our hero continued to move forward all the time, not giving anyone a rest. Immediately after that, the guys went to the next dungeon because Tony wanted to clear them all. After some time, he easily killed the dragon and again completed the task perfectly. After this, they fought with the Egyptian god who confirmed them in the temple. They also easily defeated him and left, taking all the trophies they were entitled to. Thus, the guys conquered every dungeon that came their way. Damon and Michael were impressed by the skills of their partner, with whom they set off. Michael noticed that they had one last dungeon left, judging by the map. Tony was glad that he could get this over with and go home. After some time, the guys arrived in a city inhabited by strange people. A little ahead, near the fountain, they noticed a beautiful girl surrounded by men. It was a blonde in a pink dress who was incredibly beautiful. Right in front of our heroes, a huge evil dragon attacked the city. He quickly grabbed the girl with his clawed paws and lifted her into the air. The dragon stole a local beauty and quickly flew away from the city with her. The guys asked the men in the square what had just happened. Michael noticed that these scenes definitely looked like they were from a game. However, Damon was very surprised that he had seen these people before. The townspeople asked if the strangers wanted to kill the dragon and save the princess. The huge, evil red dragon roared loudly and opened its mouth wide. Immediately after this, a huge column of bright fire burst into the sky. The dragon was furious and went to fight the stranger who dared to disturb his peace. It was our hero Tony, who was completing his next difficult task. The dragon was far from simple. It possessed enormous magical power. The monster could increase in size and attack with physical force. Thanks to his speed, Tony managed to avoid the blow and climb up the monster's huge arm. The young man jumped on the dragon as if it were a springboard for him. Damon and Michael were impressed by our hero's incredible speed and agility. Tony had almost reached the very top when he pulled out his favorite sword. After this, he slayed the dragon, which impressed the locals. Michael realized that the old man was speaking as if he were not a video game character. Tony noticed that Damon looked like he'd seen a ghost. Suddenly, the man stepped away from them and loudly announced that he had met his son. Many years ago, his son went to explore the Western Dungeon but has since gone missing. All these years, he was looking for his son, but the local residents did not recognize him. Damon was disappointed because he thought he had finally found his child. Tony asked the guy to stop crying and wipe his snot because it looked disgusting. After that, the elder handed Damon a small bag. It turned out to be a compressed magic carpet that increased in size. The man took out a bag and threw it into the water of the fountain to demonstrate. After a couple of moments, the carpet absorbed moisture and sharply increased in size. Our hero Tony did not understand where such a strange phenomenon came from in the dungeon. Michael didn't understand how a non-playable dungeon character could be Damon's own son. Even Tony noted that the man really looks like a game character and they go through the story. Tony approached the man and began to examine him from all sides, which confused Michael. The hero noticed that the man did not react at all to his actions and played his role. The local resident was really just saying the lines that had been given to him in advance. Michael noticed that everyone they had previously met in the dungeon interacted with them in some way. Tony wondered if anyone else had encountered this problem before. Therefore, Tony suggested killing the local boss first, and then dealing with this strange plot. The guys climbed onto the magic carpet and went straight to the lair of the local boss. They did not notice that all this time someone was closely watching them. It was the same little drone that had been watching Vanessa before. At this time, outside the dungeon, Hinata and her small group lit a fire. The girl woke up only because her phone was constantly ringing loudly. It turned out to be Fang Chun, who wanted to find out the results of the mission. The man was angry because he still had not received any reports or results. He didn't understand why such a simple task was taking them so long. Hinata explained that Damon entered the dungeon, but no one ever came out. Fang Chun was angry that the trio was having fun and clearing out the dungeon. He ended the conversation and said that he would definitely return to this later. Hinata asked her subordinates if they really couldn't miss Tony. One of the guys noticed that they had been watching the entrance all night and no one had definitely come out. At this time, Fang Chun returned and said that Tony's company had reached the westernmost dungeon. After that, he ordered the company to enter the dungeon and help deal with the hero. Sometime later, an SUV was racing through the desert at high speed. The car stopped and Vanessa herself got out of the driver's seat. Following on her heels was her friend Lucy, who intended to help the girl. She didn't understand why she couldn't help her childhood friend Tony. The head of the Fan family was in his office and looked through the company's reports. Suddenly, he found something strange in the documents, so he decided to pay attention to it. The man wanted to go with Tony's company to help in the dungeon. However, suddenly an unknown man in a cloak appeared behind the head and threatened him. The stranger put a weapon to the man's throat and ordered him not to do anything. He did not intend to kill him, but ordered the Western dungeon to be left alone. The head of the Fan family was unhappy that he was prohibited from using the common dungeons. Then the stranger threatened that he could deal with the man if he did not listen to him. The head of the Fan family did not want to give up and immediately decided to increase his physical strength. He decided to be the first to attack this strange guy in a dark cloak. However, the man only had to snap his fingers to stop the head. Immediately after this, the man was immediately cut into several pieces. Meanwhile, Tony and the company were racing on a magic carpet over the desert. The guys flew between the gorges, then falling down, then rising up again. After some time, the magic carpet simply dropped the guys to the ground. Damon was disappointed with himself because he was supposed to spy on the guys, and he himself joined them. The guys landed on the ground and saw the entrance to the cave right in front of them. Judging by the surroundings, the dragon definitely possessed the fire element. The guys tried to sneak inside the cave as carefully and unnoticed as possible. There, on a pedestal in the middle of the lava, stood a girl who was chained. Damon was glad that it was not enough for him to free the princess and the dungeon was completed. However, Tony's hero believed that a trap awaited them and that everything would not be so simple. The girl was clearly hung up for them as bait, and the enemy was nowhere to be seen. Damon got too close to the fragile edge and nearly fell off the cliff into the lava. Michael tried to shout to the young girl and check whether she was alive or not. The girl did not answer them, but shook her head and mumbled something. Suddenly, to attract the girl's attention, someone threw a stone at her head. Michael didn't understand how someone could treat a hostage who was tied up so horribly. However, Tony noticed that the girl was just a game character, so she didn't feel anything. Suddenly, the floor beneath them turned into a dragon's tail and began to move. It turned out that all this time the dragon was pretending to be made of stone and was right in front of them. After awakening, he flew up and was about to attack the heroes. Tony was glad that the boss quickly revealed himself and the battle was about to begin. The dragon did not wait long. He immediately decided to burn our heroes with his fire. The guys didn't have time to realize anything when fiery power immediately rose up at them. Tony managed to jump to the side at the last moment to avoid being hit by the attack. Damon and Michael also barely managed to escape from the scene of the attack of this huge monster. With one blow, the dragon destroyed most of the land and their safe place. The floor under the heroes' feet began to tremble and gradually crumbled lower and lower. At some point, Michael still could not stay on his feet and began to fall into the cliff. He shouted very loudly to quickly attract the attention of his friends. Tony noticed his dear partner's fall and immediately extended his hand to him. At the last moment, the guy managed to grab Michael's hand and grab the edge of the cliff himself. However, this was a very dangerous situation because the dragon was preparing to attack again. Damon realized that he would have to help this company again and repay his debt. Immediately after this, the guy used the technique and caused a gust of wind. With this gust of wind, he was able to lift his partners from the gorge. The guys were incredibly grateful to Damon for helping them get out. The guys almost forgot about the dragon himself, who was very angry. Michael used his powers and tried to attract the monster's attention to himself. He succeeded. The dragon left Tony alone and turned his attention to the guy. This allowed our hero to inflict several lightning attacks on the dragon. The guy climbed up and was preparing to deliver a decisive blow to the monster's head. Tony noticed a bright red cross on the dragon's forehead, which he was aiming to hit. The guy sincerely believed that this particular place would be the most vulnerable for him. However, instead of defeating the monster, it only angered him even more. Damon watched Tony's battle from the sidelines, doing nothing. Suddenly, our hero loudly fell like a stone right next to him on the ground. Tony was battered, but pleased that he had found his opponent's weak spot. Immediately after this, the whole trio decided to attack the monster and hit the mark on its head. The guys dispersed throughout the cave and each began to do their own thing. Michael's main task was to distract the dragon, and Tony and Damon to attack it. The guys moved at the same time so that the dragon could not follow one person. After all, the monster was too strong, so even they needed outside help. Michael used his power and was able to hold the monster in one place. Because of this monster, I felt pressure on myself and could not move. However, this effect did not last long because the dragon was too large. But this time was enough for Tony to get to the right place. Damon also approached the mark on the monster's head and prepared to attack it. The guys simultaneously put their knees together and hit the mark on the monster's head. The blow was so powerful that the monster's skull literally folded in half. After this, the dungeon boss was defeated and should have started to disappear. The dragon fell to the hard ground as his body gradually evaporated. After a couple of moments, it completely disappeared, leaving only the artifact in its place. Michael couldn't believe that they defeated this huge monster so easily and simply. Tony was wondering why the standard reward didn't appear after defeating the boss. Instead, in front of them lay some strange gray cube with wires. Tony took this strange object in his hands and began to examine it from all sides. Suddenly, this cube in his hands began to move in different directions and beat with electricity. Our hero was surprised and accidentally dropped the artifact, which rolled away. After a couple of moments, it fell apart, and strange red smoke appeared in its place. The guys were distracted by the loud voice of the princess, who was calling them for help. The young girl came to her senses and began to actively call our heroes to her. The guys immediately rushed to the princess to quickly free her from captivity. However, suddenly the girl stopped calling for help and laughed maliciously. A moment later, her face was distorted and the face of a monster appeared in its place. Our hero Tony immediately realized that this was the catch of this dungeon. Instead of a neat princess, in front of them was a monster with a huge head. Tony immediately rushed forward to protect his friends from the monster's attack. He managed to knock them to the ground and avoid death from the huge clutches of the monster. The guy quickly got to his feet and looked at what he would have to fight this time. Instead of a head, the girl had a huge neck and a toothy mouth. The monster was still chained to the rock and could not move. After a couple of moments, the monster's head shrank and returned to its normal size. He again took on the image of a beautiful girl and began to laugh at the guys. Tony thought that this was the hidden boss of this dungeon. Michael did not understand how his friend came to this idea, because they had never met such a person before. Tony explained that in all the other dungeons, they first defeated the monster and then received the reward. However, in this dungeon they defeated the boss, but the reward never came out. Now it was clear why many unfortunate people who went in search of the princess never returned back. Damon mentally praised our hero because without him he would have died a long time ago. And at this time, the princess did not stop laughing and looked at the guys with malicious joy. The girl admitted that Tony was the first who could guess her true nature. It was truly the hidden S-rank boss, Jenny, who was no longer hiding her powers. The girl actively controlled her chains and attacked her opponents with them. She wanted to finish off our hero first, so she headed in his direction. At the last moment, Tony managed to jump to the side and avoid the fatal blow. However, the girl was not going to give up and attack the guy again and again. She suddenly stopped and looked like she was going to spit something out. A moment later, the girl opened her mouth and some purple, poisonous substance poured out of it. Michael and Damon decided to work together again, distracting the girl with themselves. Michael again used his power and changed the trajectory of the poison. The purple substance fell on his hands, with which the guy covered his face. However, within a second he screamed in pain because his hands received severe burns. The guy lowered his hands because he was unable to move them. Damon immediately rushed to Michael's aid because he was very vulnerable. Now he considered himself a debtor to this chubby guy and wanted to protect him. The man understood perfectly well that he was not able to deal with the monster on his own. That is why he was left alone with Michael, and our hero went to fight. The guy just wanted to protect his friend, so he tried to help him. Tony noticed that the monster's chains were of different lengths. The guys both thought that the guy was distracted again due to his OCD disease. However, Michael suggested that there might be a good reason for all this. He remembered that the long chain was for long-range attacks, and the short one for close ones. Damon said he could neutralize the monster's attacks from a distance. In this case, Tony decided that he would hold off the attacks at close range. One great idea immediately arose in our hero's head on how to defeat the monster. The boss noticed that no matter what plan they came up with, they would not be able to win. But our heroes did not listen to the monster, but agreed on how they should fight further. At this time, the monster decided to attack with its long chain at a great distance. Damon also summoned his fire whirlwind and immediately blocked her attack. Because of this, the monster's chain fell inside the vortex and could not get out of it anywhere else. The girl was handcuffed in one hand, but could still control the other. At this time, she was attacked by Tony, who took over the melee combat. The princess immediately attacked her enemy with her second hand, which contained a short chain. The blow was so strong that the monster believed that he had already won in one go. But Tony resisted. He was strong and could always compensate for any damage with his replacement doll. This is the first time the monster has encountered such an opponent, so she was surprised by his strength. The girl was preparing to spit out a portion of poison again, but Tony had a secret weapon for this case. He took out of his pocket a compact magic carpet that a local resident had given him. Right before the monster attacked, the guy forcefully threw this package right into her mouth. The reduced carpet went straight into the monster's venom that she was about to spit out. Damon and Michael were impressed by Tony's unusual strategy. Because of this carpet, the girl could not spit out her poison and looked as if she was ill. While she was distracted and unable to move, Tony decided to act. He immediately crept up to the girl and struck her with lightning speed several cutting blows. After that, the girl's body crumbled into several parts and the real reward appeared. It was exactly the same cube with wires that they had seen until that moment. However, it was real now because the hidden boss of the dungeon had been defeated. The artifact immediately began to glow and make strange sounds as it lay on the ground. The dungeon under our feet and around our heroes began to crack and fall apart. A huge column of smoke and dust rose due to the collapse of stones from all sides. After that, the guys waited until the curtain lifted and they could look around. Suddenly, instead of a cave, they found themselves in some kind of huge warehouse or laboratory. The huge doors opened right in front of them, letting travelers inside the building. The whole trio quickly entered the laboratory and tried to look around them. The guys noticed that there were people in huge glass tanks ahead of them. In one of them, Damon noticed the body of his son, whom he met in the city. Tony looked around and realized that he had never seen such a strange dungeon before. It was more like a laboratory in which monsters were grown. If you look at the map, then the border from the westernmost dungeon should end here. That is why the guys did not know what place they were in now. Suddenly, Damon screamed loudly and fell to the ground, which greatly scared the guys. During this fall, it seemed to the guy that he suddenly remembered something. Damon said he had 1,000 visions running through his head that he had previously lost. Many years ago, this was a region with dungeons for free exploration. Here, the territory under the control of the country ended and the free one began. But then the country's military took over this place and research stopped. They wanted to take these territories in order to conduct their experiments here. The military made these dungeons experimental, using local residents. Damon remembered that this was actually the first artificial dungeon. Behind all this was the country's first military commander, S-rank Hunter Gregory. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, Vanessa and Lucy were driving in a car towards the portal. The girls did not understand at all why there was such a bad signal in this place. They drove through the desert and saw Hinata and her company nearby. Lucy didn't expect to meet any acquaintances in the middle of the desert, so she was surprised. However, Vanessa did not attach much importance to this and decided not to stop. In fact, at this time, Hinata and her company were talking to Fang Chong. The man was very angry with them because his subordinates had lost their goal. He was angry that the guys couldn't even cope with such a simple task. However, at this time, the man was distracted by his boss, who burst into the office. Gregory announced that the travelers had discovered his experimental site and Fang Chun had failed his mission. The man begged to be given another chance, but the boss did not listen to him. Immediately after this, Fang Chung's loud cry was heard and the connection with him was interrupted. Hinata realized that something strange was happening and was worried about her lover. Meanwhile, in the corporation's office, Gregory attacked his subordinate. It pierced his left arm and shoulder and wrapped its tentacles around his body. Gregory said that he had already given the guy his power, so he needed to kill everyone who was in the experimental dungeon. A couple of moments later, Fang Chun again contacted his subordinates and frightened them with his appearance. The guy was half naked and various wires and pipes were sticking out of his body. He gave his subordinates the order for extermination and then hastily disappeared. At this time, our company was in the experimental laboratory and discussed what they had seen. Michael was worried that they had wandered into secret military territory and needed to escape. However, Tony believed that this was an excellent field for research. Suddenly the alarm sounded, the alarm screamed loudly and the lights went out. The door quickly slammed behind our heroes, cutting off their path to escape. Immediately after this, all the capsules were opened, green liquid poured out of them onto the floor. The enslaved people began to slowly emerge from their capsules one by one. They looked as if they were not aware of their actions and were moving according to someone else's will. Our heroes had nowhere to retreat, so they had to fight. Suddenly, a strange sound was heard from above and the ceiling began to move in different directions. Some kind of modern structure descended right in front of our heroes. Michael immediately recognized the spatial teleport, which was a key technology of the military. It was nothing like a reward for clearing a dungeon. A bright light poured out from this teleport. Then a huge capsule fell to the floor. A couple of moments later, its doors opened and gray smoke poured out from inside. Then their old acquaintance Fan Chun came out from there and caused a lot of problems for the guys. Only now, he looked much stronger and scarier, having merged with the monster. It seemed as if the force was tearing this guy's body from the inside. Now the trio of our heroes confronted Fang Chun and the enslaved people. Tony had no idea what they should do in this situation. Damon looked at his customer and did not understand why he came in person. The guy didn't want to show his cards and fight with his partners, who saved him more than once. At this time, Tony woke up from his stupor and addressed his opponent by name. The guy believed that Fang Chun had come to finish the fight they had started earlier. However, Michael stopped his friend and said that the enemy was more like local test subjects. He noticed Fang Chung's eyes, which were glowing red and looked strange. It seemed as if it was not Fang Chun, but a real monster. The next moment, the enslaved people rushed to attack our heroes. Damon had to fight with his own son, whom he had not seen for a long time. The guy didn't want to harm him, but to find a way to save him. That's why Damon decided not to kill the man, but simply knock him out. Immediately after that, he heaved the man's body onto his shoulder and supported him. Now it was the turn to fight with the rest of the villagers. Michael noticed that the others went crazy as soon as Fang Chong's eyes turned red. Therefore, the guys realized that they must first eliminate their main opponent. Michael distracted all the other monsters, and Tony quickly rushed past them. His main goal was to attack Fang Chong himself first. Our hero did not understand why his old enemy suddenly became so slow. The guy swung his sword at him, but Fang Chun easily blocked it with his bare hands. Immediately after this, the huge pipes in his body began to move and wriggle. It turned out that the young man could control them at will. The pipes acted as tentacles and also allowed them to attack opponents. Because of this, Tony even had to move quite a distance away. The young man did not understand how his old acquaintance turned into such a monster. In an instant, the situation around the guys suddenly changed dramatically. Now they were not inside the laboratory, but inside some kind of light box. Tentacles that held weapons began to emerge from behind Fang Chong's back. It was as if the guy had turned into one huge computer that he could use at will. All the parts formed into one huge weapon that resembled a cannon. All this time, a hidden camera was watching the battle of these opponents. Someone stood in front of a huge screen and controlled everything that was happening through a remote control. The man could simultaneously observe the battle inside the dungeon and what was happening outside. Thanks to his screens, he could find out all the information about the people who are in his field of vision. At the moment, Vanessa was still of practical value to this man. Therefore, he decided to focus on observing what was happening inside the dungeon. At this time, our trio was still fighting with the enslaved people and their former partner. Fang Chun activated his cannon and was about to attack our heroes with it. In just one short moment, he released a volley of incredible energy. At the last moment, hunters Tony and Michael managed to dodge the projectile. Fang Chun became more and more crazy and looked like a real monster. He continued to constantly attack his former acquaintances and did not give them a break. That kind of intensity was pretty hard for even our hero Tony to handle. The guy was incredibly tired from constantly moving and was breathing very heavily. Due to the characteristics of the surface that surrounded them, the impacts were reflected off them. Because of this, the trajectory was extremely unpredictable and it was more difficult to dodge. Tony noticed that Fang Chun did not spare his people and hit them. He could have aimed at Tony and then accidentally hit one of his assistants. This partly helped our heroes because they didn't have to separately dodge the monster's attacks. However, the trajectory of the projectile was still unpredictable and dangerous. Tony wondered if his friend Michael had come up with an idea yet. The guy knew that they would not be able to dodge laser projectiles ricocheting along the walls of a confined space for long. That is why the guys hoped that they would have at least a couple of moments to rest. Suddenly, Tony jumped out of his seat and ran straight towards his opponent. He noticed that after turning into a monster, his opponent became much slower. If so, he could use his own speed and win. Therefore, Tony kicked Fang Chong to the ground with all his might and exposed him to the blow of his own weapon. His plan worked perfectly, and his former colleague fell directly under the discharge of his own weapon. After this, there was immediately a huge explosion inside the room. The shockwave threw all the heroes aside and slammed them into the ground. After some time, the guys were able to come to their senses and get to their feet. However, through the smokescreen, they saw that someone was still standing. After a couple of moments, the smoke cleared and it turned out that Fang Chun was safe and sound. Michael noticed that they barely managed to cope with one blow, but it was not a fact that they would be so lucky again. Tony said that he wanted to try to bring one of his ideas to life. Immediately after this, the guy took a fighting stance and began to wait for his chance. He watched closely as Fang Chong fired another projectile from his weapon. Immediately after this, our hero Tony sneaked up and crawled right under him. He raised his sword high above his head and brought down a blow of enormous force. His opponent did not even have time to do anything against his quick actions. That is why Tony was able to cut off the hands of this monster with such ease. Immediately after this, the young man stopped, turned around, and ran in a different direction. Tony suddenly noticed that the monster's skin was capable of reflecting the laser charge itself. That is why he decided to use this power and test its ability. Fang Chong became enraged at the loss of his arm and prepared to shoot again. He readied his weapon and then fired a new high-power laser blast. This time, Tony swung and hit it with the monster's hand rather than with his sword. The projectile bounced off the limb perfectly and went exactly in the opposite direction. Immediately after this, there was another deafening explosion as the shell hit its target. In this way, they managed to defeat the traitor Fang Chun, but the guys did not know what to do next and how to get out of this strange dungeon.